For 28 years a dark secret lay buried beneath the old oak's shadow. A shattered family, a traitor cloaked as an angel, and a bullet that tore through the night. Will justice prevail? Or will the past remain an endless nightmare? Don't blink. This story will grip your heart, make you laugh through tears and leave you wondering, do I dare dig for the whole truth? Under the gentle morning sunlight, long shadows stretched like a languid carpet across the Sightglass estate. Andrew Thomas, at the weathered age of 69, carefully pruned a wilted leaf from his prized rose bushes. His hands, now trembling like an autumn leaf before the wind, no longer held the steadiness of youth, yet they moved through the sharp thorns with a precision honed over decades. To him this garden was more than just a patch of green. It was a sanctuary, a soothing balm ever since his beloved wife Natalie departed this world, and even more so since that fateful day 28 years ago when his son Mason vanished like smoke into the void. The crimson bourbon roses, blazing like proud flames in this season, swayed gently under his touch. "You lot look so lively," he muttered, his warm voice like a conversation with an old friend, his fingers tenderly brushing a velvety petal. "Mason would have been mad about you like this." From the main house, Sophia Grace, the stern housekeeper, watched through the kitchen window, her thin lips pressed into a straight line of judgment. 10 years as Natalie's nurse, followed by 17 more running the Sightglass estate under Edward's trust, had turned her into a living statue, cold, sharp, and uncompromising. Wiping her rough hands on a worn apron, she called out through the open window, her voice slicing the air like a blade. "Edward, where's your heart medicine? You know Dr. Connor said to take it with breakfast." Edward, hunched over the rose bushes, paused, wincing as his aging spine creaked in protest. "Sophia, I'm fine," he snapped, though his tone couldn't hide the weariness of age. He trudged slowly toward the house, his old worn boots leaving prints on the white gravel path. But then, a figure near the gardener's cottage caught his eye, making him stop short. Caleb, a young man with a face as stern as carved stone, emerged, garden tools in hand, his bright yet fathomless eyes deep as an ancient well. In just 8 short months, he had tended this land with a near-reverent devotion, as if every shovel strike, every watering, was a silent prayer. There was something about Caleb, a vague familiarity, elusive like a ghost in Edward's memory, that he couldn't quite grasp. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," Caleb said, his voice even but carrying a respectful distance. "Morning, lad," Edward replied, narrowing his eyes as he studied him. "The eastern patch needs attention. Lily always said those roses were the thirstiest." At the mention of Lily's name, a shadow flitted across Caleb's face, swift as a cloud over the moon. "Yes, sir, I'll remember," he answered, his tone dipping as if weighed by a heavy secret. Sophia suddenly appeared at Edward's side, holding a few tiny white pills, her palm outstretched like she was dispensing a favor. "Edward, come inside. It's warming up, and you know what the doctor said about overexerting yourself." He nodded reluctantly and followed her indoors, but couldn't resist glancing back. Caleb's gaze lingered on them, deep and inscrutable, like a wordless riddle awaiting an answer. Far off, on the winding road to the estate, Emily Thomas adjusted her sunglasses, her hands gripping the steering wheel of the rental car. Beside her, her mother, Isabella, sat in a daze, her once vibrant eyes now hollow and pale as a waning moon. "I can't believe it's been 17 years, Isabella whispered, her voice frail as a breeze through dry branches. "Nothing's changed." Emily squeezed her mother's hand, her warm palm a stark contrast to Isabella's icy one. "Mom, you don't have to come. We can wait until you're stronger." But Isabella shook her head, her trembling lips resolute. "There's no time left to wait, dear." A violent cough seized her suddenly, doubling her over, and Emily could only wait helplessly, her heart tightening. At 27, fresh from forensic investigator training, Emily faced her mother's mysterious illness, a gnawing force that had driven her back to Sightglass at Isabella's desperate plea, despite her mother's strength fading like a candle in the wind. As the car rounded the final bend, the manor loomed into view, grand and enigmatic, like an aged noble steeped in the past. Emily parked before the moss-covered stone steps, helping her mother out, Isabella's shaky legs clinging to her for support. The front door swung open before they could knock, and Sophia Grace stood in the threshold, her eyes flashing brief surprise before settling into a welcoming smile, a smile cold and unfeeling, never reaching her gaze. "Isabella, what an unexpected pleasure," she said, her tone sugary yet dry as expired candy. "Edward didn't mention you were coming." "He doesn't know," Isabella replied, her voice suddenly firm like a flame flaring from dying embers. "It was a last-minute decision." Sophia's gaze slid to Emily, appraising her like an archaeologist before a strange artifact. "And this must be little Emily. You've grown so much." Emily offered a handshake and a polite smile. "Miss Harper, it's been a while." Sophia's grip was rigid as ice. "Edward's resting, his heart, you know," Sophia said, ushering them inside. "But come in, I'll prepare rooms in the east wing." Stepping into the vast foyer, Emily took a deep breath, memories flooding back like a tide. Childhood days racing down the halls, playing hide-and-seek with Mason during family gatherings, before he vanished, before everything shattered like a mirror on stone. "I'll take Mom upstairs to rest," Emily said, guiding Isabella up the wide staircase. Sophia's smile widened, but her eyes remained icy, fixed on their backs like an invisible dagger. In the study, Edward dozed, head slumped on the desk, when a knock jolted him awake. Sophia entered, her face rare with unease. "Edward, you have visitors." "Isabella's here with Emily." He shot up, the fog of medication clearing instantly. "Isabella's here? Why wasn't I told?" "Apparently it's a surprise," Sophia replied, her voice calm but her shoulders taut as a bowstring. "They're settling upstairs. But Isabella, she doesn't look well." Edward braced himself on the desk, eyes wide. "What do you mean? What's wrong with her?" Sophia hesitated, as if the answer stuck in her throat. "I'm not sure, but it reminds me of what you once asked of Natalie in those early days." Edward fell silent, old memories rising like ghosts from a deep well. And somewhere in the garden, Caleb worked on, his eyes tracking the house, clutching a pendant half hidden under his shirt, an exact match to the one Edward had given Mason 28 years ago, like a thread of fate slowly unraveling. Edward's face flickered with change, his eyes widening like a lake disturbed by a thrown stone, rippling with unease. "It can't be," he muttered, his voice faltering like wind rustling through dry leaves. "It's a rare condition, the doctors said so." "I know what they said, Sophia." The aging housekeeper placed a hand on his arm, a gentle yet firm gesture, like an anchor amidst a storm of emotions. "Let me help you upstairs," she said, her tone soothing as a lullaby, though her sharp gaze never left him. "Don't burden that old heart of yours any more. It's endured enough." Edward sighed, his shoulders slumping like a branch broken under the weight of rain, letting Sophia guide him, step by slow step, up the wide staircase. From the garden, Caleb watched silently, his eyes hidden behind the blood-red rose bushes. The tall, confident young woman helping an elderly figure out of the car. A sight that made his heart pound like war drums. "Emily," he whispered, the name escaping like a bolt of lightning tearing through the fog of memory. Lily, his late mother, had spoken of her, Mason's cousin, with tender affection, showing him faded, yellowed photos where Emily beamed beside a towhead Mason. But now she was here at this very moment, as his carefully laid plan began to take shape like a completed puzzle. 8 months of toil, planting seeds of trust with Edward, dodging Sophia's suspicious glares, all to uncover the truth about his father. And now Emily's arrival was like a whirlwind, threatening to sweep everything away. Caleb retreated swiftly to the gardener's cottage, his steps light but hurried like a thief in the night. Beneath a loose floorboard he pulled out an old tin box, its peeling paint like fading memories. Inside were scraps of newspaper clippings, Lily's trembling handwritten notes, and at the center of it all, a silver pendant glinting in the twilight. The angel etched upon it glowed like a whisper from the past, its inscription still clear. "To my son Mason. Your blood is my blood forever. Father." He clutched it tightly, his palm burning, as if the small object were a thread tying him to the father he'd never known. A soft knock broke his reverie. Through the small window he saw Emily standing there, tall and lean but with a hint of hesitation, like a bird pausing before flight. Taking a deep breath to maintain his practiced calm, Caleb opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady as a quiet stream. Emily studied him, her eyes sharp as the forensic scalpel she'd once wielded. "I'm Emily Thomas, Edward's niece. I wanted to talk to the gardener about the roses. My uncle says you know them well." Caleb nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a polite smile. "Caleb Davis, ma'am. I've only been here 8 months, but I'd be happy to show you the garden." As they walked toward the main garden, the roses swaying in the breeze as if whispering secrets, Emily glanced at him, her gaze probing. "Have we met before, Mr. Davis? You look familiar, but I can't place why." Caleb kept his eyes fixed on the gravel path, his heart pounding as if it might leap from his chest. "I don't think so, Miss Thomas. If I'd met you, I'd surely remember." A smooth lie, but inside, Mason's image from Lily's stories overlapped with Emily's face, like a painting of the past come to life. In the main house, Isabella lay on an antique bed, her breaths faint as the last gusts of autumn. From her worn handbag, she pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed like faded memories. It was Natalie's, the sister-in-law she cherished, once hidden from Sophia's prying eyes years ago. When Emily entered, Isabella beckoned her closer, her frail, trembling hands pressing the journal into her daughter's grasp. "Mom, what's this?" Emily asked, her voice a mix of surprise and worry. "Natalie's," Isabella whispered, her cloudy eyes flickering with a final spark. "Read it, decode it. She was always good at little ciphers since you were small. You have to find the truth about Mason, about Natalie's death." She gripped Emily's wrist, a sudden strength from her fragile frame startling her daughter. "Nothing at Sightglass is as it seems, remember that. I'm scaring you." Isabella gave a faint smile, her voice fading like a dying candle. "You should be scared. We all should." That night, Emily sat cross-legged on the bed, Natalie's journal open across her lap. The cracked leather cover resembled aged bark, the pages filled with her aunt's elegant script, at first glance mere daily notes. Gardening, household accounts, social visits. But then the keen eyes of a forensic investigator spotted tiny, cryptic dots beneath certain letters. A simple code, a game she and Natalie had devised during those radiant summers. "Clever Aunt Nat," Emily murmured, picking up a pen to decode it. The first line chilled her blood. "Sophia watches everything. Don't trust the medicine." She pressed on, each word carving into her heart like a knife, until a sharp knock at the door rang out like a death knell. She shoved the journal under her pillow, shouting, "Come in." Sophia entered, carrying a steaming teacup, her smile as cold as winter frost. "I thought you'd need this after the long trip," she said, her eyes sweeping the room like a hawk hunting prey. "How's Isabella resting?" "She's finally asleep," Emily replied, keeping her tone steady despite her racing pulse. "Thanks for the tea." "My pleasure." Sophia set the cup on the nightstand, her voice sweet but edged with ice. "We're family after all, aren't we? Edward wants to see you tomorrow morning. He's quite shaken by your sudden arrival." Emily nodded, her hand tightening on the blanket's edge. "Mom insisted on coming right away." Sophia lingered by the bookshelf, her fingers brushing over dusty spines as if searching for something. Isabella never explained why she left so abruptly after Natalie's funeral. Some losses are harder to bear than we realize. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, cold as moonlight on a frozen lake. "Drink the tea before it cools." "Good night, Emily." When the door closed, Emily stared at the cup, its steam rising like a warning from the past. She left it untouched, returning to the journal with a mix of doubt and determination, like a warrior stepping into an unrelenting battle. Outside, the roses in the garden swayed silently, their thorns glinting in the dark, awaiting the moment the truth would be unveiled. That night, Emily sat huddled in the dimly lit bedroom, Natalie's journal spread across her lap like a prophetic book unveiling dark mysteries. Her hands traced the elegant lines of script, but the more she read, the deeper her heart sank into a sea of profound confusion. Aunt Natalie had recorded chilling details about Sophia. Vials of medicine vanishing mysteriously as if swallowed by the darkness, whispered phone calls in the dead of night like snakes hissing through the underbrush, and unexplained access to estate accounts, where money flowed away like water through fingers. Each page was a cold fragment, painting a portrait of a Sophia no longer the loyal housekeeper, but a phantom lurking behind the family's curtain. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, startling Emily like a deer roused in a deep forest. Isabella entered, her gaunt figure in a thin white nightgown resembling a lost spirit. "Mom!" Emily leapt up, guiding her to an old armchair, its leather upholstery worn like faded memories. "You should be resting." Isabella shook her head, her cloudy eyes glinting with a final resolve. "There's no time left to rest, Nikki," she whispered, her voice frail as a breeze through dry branches. "Have you decoded it?" "Part of it," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "Aunt Natalie suspected Sophia." Isabella nodded, her bony hand gripping her daughter's sleeve. "A week before she died, Natalie called me. She said she had proof Sophia was poisoning her. I meant to come, but—" She clutched her stomach, her face contorting in a spasm of pain. The journal was all she managed to hide. Emily froze, her mind spinning like a whirlwind. "What are you saying?" "History repeating itself." Isabella turned to the window, her gaze lost in the darkness where the garden lay silent. "The new gardener, Caleb. He's not what he seems either." Before Emily could press further, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, sharp as shattering glass. They rushed into the hallway, hearts pounding like war drums. Below, Edward knelt beside a toppled display cabinet, precious heirlooms, gold watches, emerald rings, scattered across the floor like fragments of a broken life. Sophia was already there, her rigid hands helping Edward to his feet. "What happened?" Emily demanded, her voice taut as a bowstring. Edward mumbled, his clouded eyes filled with confusion. "I don't know. I thought I saw someone." Sophia cut in, her voice smooth as silk but cold as ice. "Another lapse. The doctor said this would worsen with time." Emily bent to inspect. The cabinet's lock was pried open, the evidence clear as a challenge. "Aunt Natalie's pendant is gone," she said firmly. "This wasn't an accident," someone broke in. Sophia narrowed her eyes, her smile thin as a blade. "Nothing's missing. Edward's just confused." But Isabella, though frail, retorted sharply. "That pendant was lost long ago, when Mason disappeared." Sophia smirked, her tone as prickly as rose thorns. "Precisely after your cousin ran off." As they argued, Emily caught a glimpse of Caleb at the garden door, his tall, lean silhouette bathed in silver moonlight. His gaze was deep and unreadable, like the bottom of an ancient well, and when their eyes met, he melted into the shadows like a ghost. A chill ran down her spine, not from the night breeze, but from the instinct screaming within her. The next morning, the air in the Sightglass estate hung heavy, like storm clouds brewing. From Edward's study, heated voices pierced through the thick oak door like a knife through butter. Emily paused in the hallway, straining to catch every word. Sophia's voice stabbed like a needle to the heart. "Edward, be reasonable. Things started disappearing weeks ago. First your father's pocket watch, then Natalie's pearl earrings. Now we don't know what else Caleb's taken." Edward replied, his voice weak but stubborn, like an old tree resisting the wind. "That boy has nothing but dedication. You're jumping to conclusions, Sophia." Sophia's tone hardened, each word a hammer strike. "That's how they work. They earn your trust, then exploit it. Lily vouched for him, but her judgment in her final years was hardly reliable." Emily couldn't take it anymore. She knocked firmly and stepped inside, uninvited. Sophia stood by the window, arms crossed like a statue of authority, while Edward sat behind his desk, his haggard face like that of a man who just fought a battle. "Everything all right?" Emily asked, her gaze probing. Sophia offered a faint smile, sweet as expired candy. "Just a minor issue. Nothing for you to worry about." "If it's about last night's break-in, I want to help," Emily said, her voice steady as stone. "I'm a trained investigator after all." Edward's eyes brightened as if finding light in the fog. "Good idea. This is family business, we should handle it together." But Sophia countered instantly, her voice cold as a winter gust. "No need. Besides, your mother needs you more. Isabella should rest." Emily met Sophia's stare, unflinching. "As family, I'm concerned about these thefts. If there's an intruder, we need to find out." Sophia's smile widened, but her eyes remained sharp as a hidden blade. "I've already called the police about Caleb Davis. They'll be here this afternoon." Edward looked up, alarmed like a trapped animal. "You did what without consulting me?" "I'm protecting you, Edward," Sophia replied, her tone even but firm as steel. As I always have. She glanced at her wristwatch, a small but commanding gesture. I need to prepare your midday medicine. Excuse me. As she left, Edward sighed, his trembling hands cradling his head. She thinks your old uncle's useless, doesn't she? He muttered, his voice bitter as cold coffee. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder, her heart heavy as lead. I'll find the truth, uncle. No matter how deep I have to dig. Outside, Caleb worked silently among the roses, his hand tightening around the silver pendant in his pocket. The tiny angel-engraved piece where Edward's inscription to Mason quietly told an unknown story. The wind swept through the garden, carrying the faint scent of flowers and whispers of the past, like a promise that secrets wouldn't stay buried in the shadows forever. Emily stood there, her gaze drifting to the horizon, her resolve burning like an unquenchable flame. She would be the one to illuminate the truth, whatever the cost. After Sophia left, Emily turned to her uncle, her eyes sharp as the forensic scalpel she once wielded. You don't believe Caleb's the culprit, do you? Edward sighed, the sound heavy like wind whistling through an old door, carrying the weariness of age and memory. I don't know what to believe anymore, Emily. But there's something about that boy, like a familiar shadow passing in the mirror, reminding me of someone. Mason, Emily suggested, her voice soft as rustling leaves. Edward flinched, his eyes widening, lighting up like an oil lamp in the dark. Yes, how did you know? I've noticed it too. Emily pulled a chair to sit across from him, her gaze probing like an explorer before a mysterious cave. Uncle Edward, how much do you really know about Caleb? Edward rubbed his temples, the wrinkles on his forehead deepening like trails carved by time. Not much. Lily introduced him before she passed. She said he had a knack for plants, like he could whisper to them. Sophia thinks I'm old and confused, seeing Mason in every young man. Maybe she's right. Emily took his hand, her warm palm as if to lend him strength. I don't think you're losing it. But we should talk to Caleb before the police arrive and turn this into a mess. They found Caleb in the greenhouse, where sunlight filtered through misty panes, illuminating his figure as he carefully transplanted a rose bush. His hands moved with a surgeon's precision, each cut and motion reverent, like a silent ritual. He looked up as they entered, wiping dirt from his hands with a tattered rag, his voice deep as a quiet stream. Mr. Thomas, Miss Thomas. Edward began awkwardly, his voice trembling like dry branches in the wind. Caleb, there's some concern about items missing from the house. Caleb's face remained calm as a still lake. Miss Harper thinks I took them. Did you? Emily asked bluntly, her gaze piercing as if to strip away every secret. No, ma'am, Caleb replied, his voice steady as stone. I respect Mr. Thomas and this place too much to do that. Edward studied him, his eyes narrowing as if searching for a lost puzzle piece. Sophia's called the police. They'll be here soon. A flash sparked in Caleb's eyes, not fear but a cold calculation sharp as a freshly honed blade. I see. If I've got nothing to hide, there's nothing to worry about, right? Emily tilted her head, observing his every subtle movement. With all due respect, Miss Thomas, the police often see what they want to see. A young man, no family, working at a wealthy estate where things go missing. It's an easy conclusion, like taking candy from a child. You don't have family? Edward asked, curiosity laced with suspicion. Caleb hesitated, his gaze drifting as if peering into a distant past. My mother died when I was young. I never knew my father. Emily noted how he sidestepped the question, not lying but not revealing everything either. Caleb, if you're innocent, let us help. But we need the truth. The truth. Caleb echoed, his voice light as a breeze through rose petals, then turned back to the plant. The truth is complicated, Miss Thomas. Edward stepped forward, his voice suddenly firm, like a flame flaring from ashes. I won't let an innocent man be accused without a chance to defend himself. Sophia may run this house, but I'm still its master. Caleb looked up, surprised by the old man's sudden resolve. Thank you, sir. But maybe I should leave. I've saved enough to. Nonsense. Edward interrupted, his voice booming like thunder. I don't want to hear it. You stay at least until we untangle this mess. As they left the greenhouse, Emily whispered to her uncle, I didn't expect you to be so firm. Edward smirked, a rare smile breaking through like sunlight on a winter day. Sometimes Sophia forgets whose name is on the deed. Don't let this hunchback fool you. I've still got some fire left. By afternoon, dark clouds rolled over the Sightglass estate, the sky growling as if heralding a fierce storm. Emily found Sophia in the kitchen, her knife slicing through vegetables with a ferocity as if venting rage on an unseen enemy. The police just called, Sophia said without looking up, her voice cold as the blade she wielded. They're delayed until tomorrow. Petty theft's clearly not a priority. That's unfortunate, Emily replied, keeping her tone neutral as a still lake, though suspicion rippled within her. Uncle Edward's decided to let Caleb stay until there's evidence against him. Sophia's knife froze midair, her gaze sharp as a needle. Edward's not thinking clearly. His medicine. About that, Emily cut in, her voice tempered like steel. The medicine he's on. His symptoms seem worse after each dose. Sophia's smile was frigid as winter frost. I'm a licensed nurse, Emily. Edward's medicine is prescribed by Dr. Connor. If you have questions, ask him, though I doubt he'd appreciate a rookie forensic tech questioning his expertise. Investigator, Emily corrected, her eyes locked on Sophia. And I'm not doubting his expertise, just how you manage it. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring pushed to its limit, until a thunderclap shook the house, accompanied by Edward's piercing shout from the front. They raced out, hearts pounding like galloping horses. Edward stood at the wide-open front door, rain pouring down like silver blades, yelling, "Caleb!" Through the deluge, Caleb's figure emerged, trudging down the path with a rough canvas bag slung over his shoulder, his wet hair plastered to his forehead. "Edward, you'll kill yourself," Sophia scolded, but he ignored her, stepping onto the porch despite her protests. "Get back here, boy. That's an order, not a request." Caleb halted, rain streaming down his face, his deep eyes flickering with resignation. He turned back reluctantly, his steps dragging on the slick gravel. Reaching the steps, his foot caught on a jagged stone, and he stumbled, falling. The bag slipped, spilling its contents across the wet porch. Old clothes, a battered book, and a small silver object that rolled to Edward's feet, glinting in the storm. Time seemed to stop. Edward bent down, his trembling hand picking it up. A silver pendant with an angel, its inscription clear under a lightning flash. "To my son Mason. Your blood is my blood forever." "Father, where did you get this?" Edward whispered, his voice faltering as if swept away by the rain. Caleb stood still, rain coursing down his face, his eyes fixed like a statue's. "Sir, I can explain. This was Mason's." Edward looked up, his eyes wild like a fire blazing in the storm. "I gave it to my son for his 17th birthday. How do you have it?" Sophia shoved Emily aside, her voice cutting like a knife. "Obviously he stole it like everything else." "No," Edward roared, his voice thunderous. "This hasn't been in the house. Mason was wearing it the night he disappeared." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the relentless rain bearing witness. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady as granite. "Caleb, you need to tell the truth now." His shoulders slumped, like a branch breaking under the storm's weight. "Can we go inside? This is a long story, longer than this rain." In Edward's study, the oil lamp flickered like a flame struggling to cling to life against a cold wind. Caleb sat there, a damp towel draped around his shoulders, rainwater still dripping from his matted hair onto his angular face, like tears of an untold past. The silver pendant lay on the table between them, silent as a mute witness, the light reflecting off the engraved angel as if whispering buried secrets. Sophia stood near Edward, her face a perfect mask of concern, but her eyes, oh those eyes, were as cold as ice, untouched by any emotion. "My mother was Eleanor Ruby," Caleb began, his voice steady as the rain falling outside, though his soaked clothes clung to him like a reminder of the storm just past. "She died when I was 10. Lily raised me after that." Edward leaned forward, his trembling hands like dry branches in the wind, his eyes wide as if to devour every word. "Our Lily? Lily how?" Caleb nodded, his gaze deep as an ancient well. "She was my mother's friend. When Eleanor passed, Lily took me in, raised me in a small town about 50 miles from here. A place where every road told a sad story, every house bore the marks of time. Convenient, Sophia interjected, her voice sharp as a freshly honed blade. When there's no one left alive to verify your tale. Caleb ignored her, as if her words were mere breezes passing by, and continued. Before she died, Lily told me about the Sightglass estate, about the Thomas family. She said I had a right to know my roots. He reached out to touch the pendant, his fingers brushing it as if caressing a sacred relic. She gave me this, said it belonged to my mother, a gift from the man she loved, a man named Mason Thomas. Edward's face paled like moonlight obscured by clouds, his eyes glistening as if on the verge of breaking. If what you're saying is true, you're Eleanor Ruby's son? Caleb nodded slowly, his voice low like a distant bell tolling. Yes, sir. Sophia let out a dry, scoffing laugh, the sound brittle as a snapping twig. Ridiculous. He's clearly making this up to escape blame. Eleanor Ruby disappeared at the same time as Mason. Everyone knows that. Caleb glanced at her, his eyes cold and sharp as a blade hidden in its sheath. Not quite. My mother fled when she learned she was pregnant. Her father would have disowned her for carrying Thomas' blood. Emily watched him, her eyes glinting like the forensic fire burning in her mind. You said you were 10 when your mother died. So you're 28, the same age Mason was when he vanished. The timeline didn't quite align perfectly, but she kept that thought to herself, like an unturned card. Edward stood abruptly, his frame swaying like an old tree in a storm, his hand clutching the pendant as if to crush the pain within it. I need to think. He looked around, his voice trembling but resolute as thunder. No one calls the police, no one leaves this place until I figure out what's happening in my own house. Everything stays as it is, including you, young man. As Edward left the room, Sophia trailed him like a cold shadow, leaving Emily and Caleb in a heavy silence. You haven't told the whole truth, have you? Emily spoke, her voice piercing the darkness like a needle. Caleb gave a sad smile, fragile as a rose petal in the rain. No one in this house tells the whole truth, Miss Thomas. Not even me. Emily slipped quietly into her mother's room, her steps light as a cat stalking prey, careful not to wake Isabella, who lay still on the bed. Her mother's breaths were faint as a passing breeze, her skin thin as wax under the dim light filtering through thick curtains, like a still life painting slowly fading. On the bedside table, 3 amber pill bottles stood neatly aligned, Sophia's handwritten labels clear as a sentence of judgment. Emily silently photographed each bottle with her phone, the flash sparking like tiny lightning, then pulled a plastic bag from her pocket, carefully collecting samples from each, her movements precise as if analyzing a crime scene. Suddenly, Isabella's eyes snapped open, blazing like the last ember in a pile of ash. Nikki, she whispered, her voice weak as falling leaves. Be careful. Emily took her mother's hand, her warm palm contrasting with Isabella's icy chill. How do you feel? Like I'm dissolving piece by piece, Isabella replied, her voice drifting like an echo from the past. Like Natalie back then. She gripped Emily's hand tighter, her nails digging into skin as if to impart a final message. Have you found anything in the journal yet? Some of it, Emily admitted, her voice lowering. But decoding slow. Mom, I need to ask. Did you start feeling sick before, or after deciding to come here? Isabella's eyes focused for a moment, like an oil lamp about to run dry, flaring one last time. Before. That's why I came. I recognized the symptoms exactly like when Natalie declined. The doctors were baffled, but I knew. Her voice dropped, cold as a winter wind. It's her. Just like with Natalie, Sophia. Emily nodded in confirmation, her gaze sharp and cold as a freshly honed forensic scalpel, slicing through the fog of doubt that enveloped them. Isabella, lying frail on the bed, responded with a fragile nod, like a butterfly's wing about to break, her cloudy eyes flickering with the last spark of determination. I've suspected for years, she whispered, her voice trembling like a breeze through dry branches. But there was no proof until last month. She came to visit me, bringing tea and biscuits, as thoughtful as an angel descended to bless us. I even smiled at her. Nikki smiled like a foolish, trusting old woman. She paused, a dry chuckle turning into a wheezing cough, the sound like stone grinding against stone, making Emily shudder. 2 days later, I couldn't get out of bed, as if my life force had been drained with every breath. Emily's blood ran cold, like a glacial river coursing through her chest, each heartbeat slowing as if tolling a death knell. "She poisoned you?" she asked, her voice faltering as if swept away by a storm of memories. Isabella nodded, her gaunt hand gripping her daughter's, nails digging into flesh as if to etch a warning into her bones. "Look at your Uncle Edward." His heart condition started the same way. Confusion like a man lost in fog, weakness like a rotting branch before the wind, strange spells creeping in like a thief in the night. "I warned him, but he just laughed, said I was worrying too much, like a mother hen with her chicks." She sighed, the sound faint as a candle about to gutter out, her eyes drifting into the void as if seeing ghosts of the past. A soft knock at the door broke through her reverie, slicing the silence like a blade through the night. Emily swiftly tucked the pill sample she'd collected into her pocket, her hands moving with the agility of a shadow dancer, concealing the evidence before the door swung open. Sophia stepped in, holding a gleaming silver tray, her smile as polished as if molded sweet, perfect, but cold as winter frost. "Time for Isabella's medicine," she announced, her voice smooth as silk but edged with the sharpness of hidden rose thorns. "How are we today?" "Tired," Isabella replied, her voice weak as falling leaves, the keen alertness from moments ago dissipating like morning mist under harsh sunlight. "So tired." Sophia arranged the pills in a small cup, her movements methodical as a machine, but her eyes, oh those eyes, swept over Emily like a hawk hunting prey. "These will ease the pain," she said, then turned to Emily with a smile thin as a blade. "You look exhausted, dear. Why don't you rest?" "I can sit with Isabella." Emily straightened, her gaze steady as granite, unshaken by the honeyed trap. "No need to worry. I'm fine. I'll stay." Sophia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened like cooled steel, a glint of cold sharpness she couldn't hide. "Suit yourself," she replied, her tone even but carrying the chill of a bitter winter. She handed the cup to Isabella, who obediently swallowed the pills, her trembling hands like an autumn leaf about to fall from its branch. "Dr. Connor will come tomorrow," Sophia continued, her voice soft as a lullaby but laced with absolute control. "He'll check on both Edward and Isabella. It's a blessing to have him managing the family's health. A grace amidst the storm, isn't it?" She smiled, but Emily felt the thorn beneath that smile, like a beautiful rose ready to draw blood from anyone who dared touch it. After Sophia left, Emily stood silently for a few minutes, her gaze fixed on her mother as if trying to memorize every line on that gaunt face. She leaned down gently, her hand slipping into Isabella's mouth to retrieve the pills her mother had cleverly hidden under her tongue. A subtle performance by a frail but shrewd woman. "Good girl," Isabella whispered, her voice faint as leaves falling in the wind, but her eyes sparkled with pride. "You've always been smart like Natalie." Emily gave a sad smile, adding the pills to the collection of samples in her plastic bag, each tiny tablet like a poisonous gem waiting to be exposed. "I need to analyze these," she said, her voice low like a vow in the dark. "There's a lab in town, they'll help." Isabella's eyelids drooped, like a window closing before a storm. "The gardener, watch him. He's not what he seems," she murmured, then drifted into sleep. Emily kissed her mother's forehead, whispering as if promising herself, "Rest, Mom. I'll handle everything." In the kitchen, warm with the faint scent of tea, Emily found Caleb brewing a pot, his movements as precise as when he pruned the roses, slow, steady, like an artisan immersed in every detail. "Miss Harper won't like you using the family kitchen," she remarked, leaning against the doorway, her gaze probing like a detective before a suspect. Caleb smirked, a fleeting smile like rare sunlight on a winter day. "Miss Harper's giving Mr. Thomas his evening medicine. I've got 8 precious minutes of freedom." He offered her a cup, the steam rising like a silent invitation. Emily took it, her fingers brushing the rim, then asked bluntly, "Why did you lie about your age?" Caleb didn't flinch, his deep, ancient well eyes remaining calm. "I never specified my age." "You implied you're 28, Emily countered, her voice sharp as the forensic scalpel she once held. "If you're Eleanor Ruby's son, and she disappeared with Mason, you couldn't be older than 25. Caleb sipped his tea, his eyes glinting like a lake reflecting moonlight. "Very perceptive, Miss Thomas. But does it matter?" "Yes," Emily snapped. "If you're hiding something that could help or hurt Uncle Edward." Caleb set his cup down, the sound gentle but firm, like the final snip on a bush. I'm not here to hurt Mr. Thomas. Then why are you here? The truth this time. Before he could answer, the kitchen door swung open, and Sophia swept in like a cold wind, her gaze flicking from Emily to Caleb, suspicion blazing like a fire in the hearth. Emily, I've been looking for you, Sophia said, her voice sweet as honey but edged with thorns. Edward wants to see you. She glanced at Caleb, her eyes narrowing like a cat stalking prey. I believe the eastern fence needs tending, Davis. Caleb nodded deferentially, his demeanor humble as a devoted worker. My break's just ended, ma'am. He cleaned his cup and brushed past Sophia, but her eyes stayed glued to his back as if trying to bore through him. You should be careful around him, Sophia said once Caleb was gone, her voice dropping like a warning from the shadows. His story doesn't add up. Emily smirked, a faint smile like dim moonlight. No story in this house adds up, Sophia. In the study, Edward sat behind his desk, the silver pendant gleaming in his hand like a lost star in the night. He turned it over and over, as if each twist might unveil a new secret from the past. You wanted to see me? Emily asked, closing the door behind her, the sound echoing like the opening salvo of a silent battle. Edward looked up, his eyes brighter than she'd seen since arriving, like an oil lamp flaring through fog. I didn't take my medicine, he confessed, his voice low but strong as distant thunder. Since yesterday. My mind's clearer than ever. Emily sat across from him, her heart surging like waves against a shore. Maybe because you don't need as much as you've been given. Edward frowned, the wrinkles on his forehead deepening like trails carved by time. What are you suggesting? Do you remember when your heart condition was diagnosed? He pondered, his gaze drifting into distant memories. About 5 years ago. I started getting confused, weak. Sophia was worried, called Dr. Connor. He's been treating me since. And Dr. Connor, Emily continued, her voice sharp as a needle, was Sophia's old colleague from her nursing days. He retired, then became a private physician. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Edward narrowed his eyes, a spark flashing within like lightning. Emily, what are you getting at? I want to test your medicine samples. Edward stared at her, his hand tightening around the pendant as if to crush his doubts. You think Sophia's doing something? No, it can't be. She's cared for this family for decades. Uncle Edward, Emily pressed, her voice low like a storm warning. Mom's showing the same symptoms as Aunt Natalie. Don't you find that strange? He gripped the pendant harder, his gaze dropping as if peering into an abyss. Even if what you say is true, why? What does Sophia gain? Control of Sightglass, Emily replied crisply, her voice firm as stone. She's managed everything for years, with you growing more dependent on her. And with no direct heir, except Mason's son. Edward looked up, his eyes wild like a fire blazing in the dark. If he's Mason's son, we only have his word and the pendant, Emily cautioned, her voice cold as tempered steel. That item could have come to him in many ways. Edward sank back in his chair, his breaths heavy like a branch breaking in a gale. I don't know what to believe anymore. He slid a leather box across the desk, his voice hoarse. Here's my medicine. Take what you need for testing. Emily carefully collected the samples, each pill dropping into the plastic bag like pieces of a deadly puzzle. I'll have answers soon. Until then, pretend to take the medicine and keep an eye on Caleb. We don't know his true intentions yet. The small town's medical lab was tidy, its cold white light glinting off polished instruments. Dr. Elena Gavin, an old college friend of Emily's, stood there, her eyes a mix of curiosity and concern. This is unusual, Emily, she said, labeling each sample, her fingers moving like an artist preparing to paint the truth. I should demand proper paperwork. I know, Elena, Emily replied, her voice low like a plea. But this is my family. I think someone's being poisoned. Elena raised an eyebrow, a faint smile like dim moonlight. That's a heavy accusation. What am I looking for? Start with common neurotoxins, Emily said, her gaze sharp as a blade. Something causing progressive weakness, confusion, stomach pain, heart irregularities. Narrow it to about 50 compounds. Elena nodded, her tone grave as a courtroom oath. I'll run the tests. But if I find anything illegal, I have to report it. You understand? Emily nodded, her heart heavy as lead. I'm counting on that. Outside, the wind swept through the small town, carrying whispers of fate, and Emily knew the truth, whether bitter or liberating, was drawing closer with every passing second. When Emily returned to the Sightglass estate, her heart pounded like a galloping horse, but stepping into her mother's room, she found only a cold emptiness. The bed was neatly made, the blanket folded flat as if no one had ever lain there, sending panic surging through her like waves crashing against rocks. She rushed to the window, ears straining, and then voices drifted up from the garden like an unexpected sedative. Through the misty glass she saw Isabella in a wheelchair, her frail hands clutching a thin blanket, beside Edward, both silently watching Caleb work meticulously among the crimson rose bushes. Sophia emerged from behind like a cold shadow, her voice startling Emily like a winter gust. Fresh air's good for them both, Sophia said, her tone sweet as honey but laced with winter's chill. Though I worry for your mother's health, Isabella insisted on coming out. How thoughtful of you to allow it, Emily replied, not bothering to mask the sharp thorn of sarcasm, her gaze locking onto Sophia as if to pierce through that perfect mask. For a fleeting moment Sophia's professional veneer slipped, revealing a cold, calculating stare, like a fox stalking prey in the underbrush. Family is everything to me, Emily, she said, her voice even but cutting as a blade. I've spent my life caring for the Thomases. Maybe you'd understand if you hadn't been gone for 17 years. Emily smirked, a faint smile like dim moonlight. Then why did you visit my mother last month? Out of family devotion. Sophia didn't answer, but Emily saw her hands clench, her breath catch like a taut string. Someone had to check on Isabella, Sophia said smoothly like water over stone. Edward's too weak to travel far. Convenient that my mother fell ill right after your visit, Emily shot back, her voice sharp as the forensic scalpel that once sliced through dark secrets. Quite a coincidence, isn't it? Sophia smiled, a thin smile like a blade hidden in its sheath. Coincidences happen. Like Caleb Davis showing up right after Lily died, or you arriving when Edward's most vulnerable. She glanced at her watch, a small but commanding gesture. Excuse me, it's time for Edward's medicine. As Sophia walked away, Emily watched her hand Edward pills and water. He obediently raised them to his mouth, but when Sophia turned to Isabella, he discreetly slipped them into his pocket, a subtle act only Emily caught. In the garden, Caleb looked up, his eyes meeting hers through the roses, a silent acknowledgement flashing like lightning in a storm. Emily froze, that moment sudden and profound, felt like a tacit alliance against a common foe. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. A message from Elena glowed like a warning from fate. Preliminary results. Call now. Serious. She raced to her room, heart pounding like war drums, and Elena's voice came through the speaker, sharp as a needle piercing the night. It's in all the samples, Emily, different concentrations, but it's there. Aconitine. Emily pressed the phone closer, her breath catching. What is it? A neurotoxin from the monkshood plant, also called wolfsbane or aconite. A beautiful but deadly flower. Causes digestive issues, then progresses to paralysis, muscle weakness, blurred vision, and eventually heart arrhythmias. Elena paused, her voice grave as a verdict. Emily, this isn't random. The concentrations are too precise, too consistent for contamination. Someone did this on purpose. Emily felt her blood turn to ice, like a glacial river through her chest. They knew exactly what they were doing, she whispered, fear hardening into resolve like steel forged in fire. Small doses building up over time, mimicking natural illness, hard to detect unless you're looking for it. Elena sighed over the line, the sound heavy as wine through a graveyard. Exactly. I have to report this to the authorities, you know that. Give me 24 hours, Emily pleaded, her voice trembling like a string about to snap. I need more evidence. She hung up, sinking onto the bed's edge, Natalie's journal open beside her like a silent companion. The last line she decoded painted a clear picture. Natalie's growing suspicion of Sophia, but suspicion wasn't proof, and proof was what she needed to save her family from the tightening grip of darkness. A soft knock broke her reverie, slicing through the silence like a blade in the night. Caleb stepped in, closing the door gently as a ghost, his voice low as a deep stream. Miss Harper's busy with your mother. We don't have much time. Emily studied him, weighing him like a hunter facing prey of uncertain intent. Finally, she decided to play her biggest card. My uncle's and mother's medicine contains aconitine, a toxin from monkshood. Do you know anything about it? Caleb was surprised he didn't show it. Monkshood grows in the northeast corner of the estate. I uprooted it when I got here. He paused, his eyes deep as an ancient well. Lily suspected it before she died. She sampled Natalie's medicine, noted the symptoms, consistent with aconite poisoning. Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding like war drums. Caleb, it's time to come clean. Who are you? He hesitated, then squared his shoulders like a warrior preparing for battle. Not here. I need to show you something in Mason's old room. Have you been in there? It's been locked since I arrived. Sophia has the key. Caleb smirked, a faint smile like dim moonlight. I know another way. Meet me there in 20 minutes. East wing, 3rd floor. The 3rd floor of Sightglass was rarely visited. A maze of dusty guest rooms where laughter had long fallen silent. Mason's room sat at the end of the hall, its door sealed with a heavy lock like a gate to a forgotten past. Emily arrived on time, finding Caleb already waiting, his tall, lean frame blending into the shadows as if part of them. He signaled for silence, leading her into the adjacent room, then to a connecting bathroom. With the deftness of a hunter setting a trap, he removed the mirror above the sink, revealing a narrow service passage, dark, webbed with cobwebs like threads of time tangled together. The original owners built these for maintenance, he explained, his voice low as a whisper from the past. Lily showed me when I first arrived. No one's used them in decades. Emily eyed the passage, her heart thrumming like a string before a fateful note. What do you want me to see in there? Caleb turned, his eyes blazing like a fire in the night. The truth, not just about me but about all of us. Follow me, Miss Thomas. It's time to lift the veil on the secrets this house has buried too long. The wind outside howled through the cracks, like a song of restless spirits, and Emily followed, her heart heavy yet burning with resolve, like a small oil lamp facing endless darkness. As Emily and Caleb stepped into Mason's bedroom, time seemed to freeze, like a living museum dedicated to a lost son. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and faded memories, posters of 90s rock bands plastered on the walls like flags fluttering from a vibrant youth, now mere ghosts. Gleaming baseball trophies lined the shelf, each one twinkling like a tiny star in the sky of recollection, and a collection of baseball caps hung on hooks, each one an untold story. Sophia kept everything as it was, Caleb whispered, his voice soft as a breeze through rose petals, coming weakly to dust, but nothing moved, nothing touched, like a tended tomb. Emily ran her fingers over the oak desk, feeling the scratches of time, then paused at the framed photos. Mason beaming beside his parents, his smile bright as summer sun. Mason mid-pitch in a baseball game, his eyes blazing with determination, and Mason arm around a beautiful blonde girl, their eyes sparkling with young love. Eleanor Ruby, Caleb confirmed, noting her curious glance. She was stunning. His voice dipped, carrying a deep sorrow too personal, too real for the story he'd told, that his mother died when he was 10. Emily turned, her gaze sharp as the forensic scalpel she once wielded. What are we looking for here? Lily said Mason had a secret hiding spot, Caleb replied, moving to the bookshelf, his fingers gliding over the old volumes like an artist seeking the perfect note. Even his parents didn't know. She wasn't sure exactly where, but thought it was near his favorite books. They began their search like two explorers in a cave of memories. Emily checked behind photo frames, lifted floor rugs, even slid her hand into the mattress, but found only dust and silence. Caleb tapped the walls, listening for hollow sounds like a hunter tracking prey's footsteps. Finally, Emily noticed a faint discoloration on the wall behind the headboard, a mark left by time. She pressed it, her palm trembling, and a loose panel slid aside, revealing a small dark recess like the mouth of a deep well. Inside was a rusted metal box, ancient as a treasure from a distant past. Emily pulled it out, her heart pounding like war drums, and set it on the bed between them. The corroded lock gave way easily under Caleb's pocketknife, like a door opening to a lost world. Within was a time capsule of young love and desperate dreams. Letters from Eleanor to Mason tied with a faded red ribbon like dried blood, each line a hurried heartbeat. A tiny ultrasound image, the seed of life yet to bloom. A hand-drawn map, a red line snaking to a town hundreds of miles away like a promise of freedom, and at the bottom a journal bearing Natalie's name, not the one Isabella had given her. "This is a different one," Emily whispered, flipping through the pages, her fingers trembling as if touching a sacred relic. "Natalie must have kept multiple journals," Caleb remarked, his voice low like a distant bell tolling. "This one's more personal, no codes but more frantic." Emily read the final entries aloud, her voice faltering as if swept into her aunt's emotional storm. June 17th. Mason's been gone a week. Edward won't call the police, insists he'll return when he's sober. I called Eleanor's house but Robert Ruby says she's in Europe. I don't believe it, something's terribly wrong. June 20th. Sophia suggested hiring a private detective, discreetly to avoid family shame. I agreed, desperate for help. She recommended someone she knew from nursing school, with a brother in law enforcement. July 3rd. The detective found nothing. Mason and Eleanor vanished into thin air. Edward's drinking like it's water. Sophia's moved into the guest room to stay close. July 17th. I've started having stomach pains, dizziness. Doctor says it's stress, advises rest. Sophia cooks all my meals, insists I conserve strength. August 4th. Caught Sophia rummaging in Mason's room today. She said she was cleaning but I saw her trying to open a drawer. When I asked, she said my episodes are making me paranoid. What episodes? I don't recall having any. August 16th. Edward's completely dependent on Sophia now. I'm so weak my hands shake it's hard to write. I stopped drinking her tea too late. I'm afraid to contact Isabella. The last entry cut off mid-sentence, the scrawl jagged like a stifled cry for help. Emily closed the journal, her throat tightening as if strangled by a rope. She knew, she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. But she couldn't prove it in time. Caleb nodded, his gaze deep as an ancient well. Exactly. Emily picked up Eleanor's letter, reading silently, then looked up, her eyes wide as a lake reflecting lightning. Eleanor wrote to Mason. She was 2 months pregnant, excited but terrified. They planned to run away together. She flipped to the final letter, dated the day before Mason disappeared. They met at Spencer Creek Bridge, left town together. Caleb reached for the ultrasound, his fingers brushing it as if caressing a shattered dream. Their child, Emily said, staring at him. You're not just Eleanor's son, you're Mason's. You're a Thomas. Before Caleb could respond, a distant crash echoed, followed by a scream that tore through the silence like a blade slicing the night. They hurriedly replaced everything except Natalie's journal and raced into the hallway. Downstairs, Isabella lay crumpled on the parlor floor, her cloudy eyes half open like a dying oil lamp. Sophia knelt beside her, checking her pulse, her face cold as a statue. Edward stood at the threshold, pale as if he'd seen a ghost. What happened? Emily shouted, rushing to her mother's side. She insisted on walking herself, Sophia explained, her tone grave but her eyes glinting with something false. Against my advice, she fell before I could catch her. Isabella's eyes fluttered open, her faint gaze locking onto Emily. Don't, she whispered, her voice like the last leaves of autumn falling. Don't drink. Shua, save your strength, Sophia soothed, her hand swiftly producing a syringe. This is for the pain. What are you giving her? Emily snapped, her gaze sharp as a blade. A mild sedative, Sophia replied, her smile professional but icy. Prescribed by Dr. Connor. She turned to Edward. Edward, you should take your medicine too. This excitement isn't good for your heart. Edward pressed a hand to his chest, his breaths heavy like a branch breaking in the wind. Maybe you're right. I feel strange. He swayed, his face growing paler, like moonlight veiled by clouds. Emily lunged forward but Sophia was faster, her hand like a cold shadow enveloping everything. Emily stood there, her heart pounding like war drums, the journal in her hand a smoldering flame. The truth was close but the darkness still loomed thick, and she knew every passing second was a countdown to a final reckoning, for her family and for Sightglass itself. This is another episode, Sophia declared, her voice sharp and cold as a winter wind, her hand gripping Edward's arm like an iron shackle disguised in soft velvet. "Caleb, help me get him to his room. Emily, stay with your mother until I return." They guided Edward away, his steps faltering like an old branch before a storm, leaving Emily with Isabella, who had slipped into an unconscious stupor. A thin trail of saliva glistened at the corner of her mother's mouth, like the last trace of life slowly fading. Emily knelt, clutching her mother's hand, her warm palm contrasting with Isabella's icy chill. "I'll end this, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling like a small flame in the wind. "I promise." The hospital corridor was cold as a modern tomb, the sharp smell of antiseptic mingling with the distant beeping of machines, like the heartbeat of the building itself. Emily sat outside Edward's room, her body taut as a bowstring, her eyes fixed on Sophia, whispering to Dr. Connor, a gaunt man with metal-framed glasses slipping down his nose, his professional demeanor unable to mask the furtive, anxious glances he cast her way. When Sophia approached, her smile was thin as a hidden blade. "Arrhythmia, that's the official diagnosis," she announced, her voice sweet as honey but edged with thorns. "Dr. Connor wants to keep him overnight for observation, but he believes Edward will be fine with the right medication. Quite a relief, isn't it?" "Quite a relief," Emily echoed, her tone deliberately calm as a still lake, though her eyes flashed like lightning in the dark. "What about the blood tests? I requested a toxicology screen." Sophia's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing like a cat stalking prey. "Connor didn't see the need, given Edward's known condition." Emily stood tall, facing Sophia, their heights matched like duelists on a battlefield. "I insist," she snapped. "For my uncle too." Dr. Connor cleared his throat, stepping forward with the awkwardness of a man caught on a tightrope. "Miss Thomas, your uncle's symptoms align with arrhythmia. Additional tests would only strain the hospital's limited resources." Emily cut him off, her voice sharp as the forensic scalpel that once sliced through dark secrets. "Dr. Connor, I sent my uncle's medication samples to the state lab. They found aconitine, a potent neurotoxin. I'd hate to inform them that Sightglass General refused a basic tox screen for a patient showing signs of poisoning." Connor's face paled like moonlight veiled by clouds, his eyes widening behind his glasses. "Poisoning? That's a serious accusation. Easily verified with proper testing," Emily countered, her voice hard as steel forged in fire. Sophia placed a hand on the doctor's arm, her tone smooth as silk but cold as ice. "James, maybe we should humor her. When the tests come back negative, it'll put these silly suspicions to rest." Connor nodded stiffly, like a puppet jerked by strings. "I'll order the tests, but I maintain this is unnecessary." He hurried off, his steps quick as if fleeing the truth. Sophia turned back, her mask of calm slipping just enough to reveal the fury blazing beneath, her eyes flaring like fire in the night. "You're making a mistake, Emily. These accusations cause unnecessary stress, especially for Edward." "I'm not the one hurting him, Sophia," Emily replied, her voice low like a storm warning. Sophia leaned close, her breath brushing Emily's face like a chill wind from an abyss. "Careful," she whispered, her voice a hiss like a venomous snake. "You don't know what you're up against." Before Emily could retort, the elevator door slid open and Caleb stepped out, looking out of place in the sterile space, his deep eyes glinting with unease. "How is he?" he asked, keeping his distance from Sophia as if avoiding a predator. "Stable," Emily answered, her gaze not leaving Sophia. "My mother's unchanged. The nurse is with her." Caleb shifted his weight, his voice low as a deep stream. "Mr. Davis from the sheriff's office is at the estate. He wants to talk to you about the missing items you reported." Sophia's eyebrows shot up, her gaze cutting like a knife. "You called the sheriff without consulting me?" "I'm a forensic investigator," Emily replied, her tone calm as a lake but with undercurrents surging. "Reporting potential evidence in a criminal case I believe is real. I don't need your permission." Sophia's smile was frigid as winter frost, calculating like a trapper awaiting prey. "Of course. I'll stay with Edward. He'll need a familiar face when he wakes." She turned away, her steps light but resolute, then paused, glancing at Caleb. "I believe your presence here is inappropriate, Davis. Return to your duties." As Sophia disappeared behind Edward's door, Emily led Caleb to a secluded corner of the waiting area, where the cold white light couldn't dispel the darkness in her heart. "Any word from your lab contact?" Caleb asked, his voice low like a silent prayer. "Elena confirmed aconitine in all the samples," Emily replied, her hand gripping the chair's armrest as if to crush her fear. "She's reported it to the authorities, but it could take days for them to act. We don't have that long." Caleb nodded, his eyes lighting up like a small flame in the dark. "What do you need from me?" Emily studied him, weighing him like a hunter facing a beast of uncertain intent, then sighed. "The truth, the whole truth this time." They found a small cafe across from the hospital, its warm yellow lights a beacon in the storm. The murmur of patrons blended with the aroma of roasted coffee, creating a rare pocket of peace on the edge of life and death. Caleb sat across from her, hands clasped around his coffee mug, his gaze fixed on the black liquid as if peering into the depths of a memory well. "I'm not just Eleanor's son," he began, his voice low like a distant bell tolling. "I'm Mason's too, Thomas Blood. Lily raised me, but she didn't tell me everything. When I came to Sightglass, I wanted proof. Not just about my parents, but about what killed them." He looked up, his eyes deep as a dark chasm. "I've suspected Sophia for a long time, but I had nothing beyond a hunch, until you showed up." Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding like war drums. "Then why hide it from me?" Caleb gave a sad smile, fragile as a rose petal in rain. "Because the truth is a double-edged sword, Miss Thomas. It can save us, but it can also cut deeper than you realize. Sophia isn't acting alone. She has allies, and I think Dr. Connor is one of them." Outside, darkness cloaked the town, but in Emily's heart, the flame of resolve burned brighter than ever. Like a small oil lamp facing a tempest, ready to illuminate the truth whatever the cost. In the dim glow of the cafe, Caleb sat across from Emily, his hands gripping the coffee mug, as if it were an anchor holding him steady amid a storm of memories. "Lily raised me, just as I told Edward," he began, his voice low like a bell tolling across a silent valley. "But I was only a few months old when Eleanor died, not nearly 10 as I'd said. Lily was my mother's midwife, delivering me in a small wooden cabin 50 miles from the Sightglass estate, deep in the woods amid howling frigid winds." Emily tilted her head, her gaze sharp as the forensic scalpel that once cut through darkness. "And Mason?" she prompted gently. Caleb tightened his grip on the mug, his knuckles whitening like marble. Then he disappeared. Eleanor waited for him at Spencer Creek Bridge that night, under a dim moon and the murmur of flowing water, but he never came. He paused, his deep ancient well eyes glinting with old pain. "Lily said my mother was certain Sophia was involved." The day before, Eleanor overheard Sophia arguing with Mason, her voice sharp as a dagger, threatening to tell Edward the truth about Natalie, if he didn't end things with my mother. "So Eleanor fled, pregnant with me, to protect the child in her womb." Caleb nodded, as if affirming a silent vow. "She feared Sophia would find her. For 10 years we drifted from town to town, living like ghosts, always looking over our shoulders with constant dread." Emily narrowed her eyes, her voice low like a whisper in a storm. "Then Eleanor fell ill?" "With the same symptoms as Natalie," Caleb confirmed, his voice faltering as if choked by memory. "Stomach pain, dizziness, growing weakness. Within months she was gone. Sophia had found her, Lily believed that. After that she took me farther away, changed my name, kept me hidden like a seed buried in winter soil. When I was old enough, she told me everything. About my parents, about Sightglass, about my inheritance." His voice hardened like steel tempered in fire. "And about Sophia Grace. Yet you still came here," Emily interjected, her gaze probing like a hunter before prey. "Right into her tiger's den. Why?" Caleb looked up, his eyes flickering like a small flame in the dark. "Because Lily was dying. She feared her knowledge would be buried with her. She'd spent her life gathering evidence against Sophia, but as a housekeeper no one took her seriously, just a rambling old woman with wild tales." He gave a sad smile, fragile as a rose petal in rain. "I came to finish what she started, to expose Sophia, to bring her into the light of justice." "And to claim your inheritance?" Emily suggested, the corner of her mouth twitching. "I don't expect Edward to accept me," Caleb replied, his voice deep as a quiet stream. I just want justice for my parents. He hesitated, as if standing on the edge of a final truth. One more thing. After your mother arrived, Sophia grew restless, erratic. She started checking the old stables at night. Abandoned for decades, overgrown with weeds, its broken tiles scattered like shards of shattered memories. Emily frowned. The stables? What's there? Something she doesn't want anyone to find, Caleb answered, his gaze cold and sharp as a freshly honed blade. Emily's phone buzzed, cutting through her thoughts like a death knell. A message from Elena flashed. Talk scheduled by Connor mysteriously cancelled. Lab alerted. New samples being taken. Act fast. She showed the screen to Caleb, her heart pounding like war drums. Sophia's desperate, he warned, his voice low like a prophecy. Lily suspected she killed 4 people herself. Mason, Natalie, Eleanor, and an old caretaker who saw her tampering with Natalie's food. If she thinks we're close to exposing her. Emily's mind raced like a horse galloping across a wild field. Possibilities swirling like a tornado. We need hard evidence. Something to force the authorities to act now. The stables, Caleb suggested, his eyes flashing like lightning. Whatever she's hiding there must be critical. Tonight, Emily decided, her voice firm as granite. After everyone's asleep. As they left the cafe, Caleb paused, his shadow stretching long under the streetlight like an unspoken confession. Emily, there's one more thing you should know. That we're cousins? She smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling at his surprise. I'd already figured it out. And you don't mind that I'm your long-lost cousin? Why would I? She replied, her voice warm as a hearth fire. A flicker of disappointment crossed Caleb's eyes, but he quickly masked it. No reason, he muttered as if convincing himself. Back at the hospital, a frigid air cloaked the corridor like winter's breath. They found Frank Parker, the old caretaker, sitting by Edward's bedside, his presence sturdy as an ancient oak in a storm. Sophia's absence was conspicuously suspicious, leaving an empty space like a silent warning. Frank! Emily exclaimed, rushing to hug him, the embrace warm as rare sunlight on a winter day. I didn't know you were in town. Heard Edward was admitted. I couldn't sit still, Frank replied, his voice deep as waves on a shore, his eyes glinting with respect as he looked at Caleb. You must be Lily's boy. She always spoke well of you in her letters. You knew Lily? Caleb asked, his voice breaking the silence like a cracked bell. For 40 years, Frank confirmed, his eyes clouding as if peering through time's fog. We kept in touch after Sophia fired me. Lily never trusted her. Neither did I. He lowered his voice, as if whispering a secret from the grave. I need to speak with you two privately, about the night Mason disappeared. They found an empty exam room, its cold white light illuminating Frank's weathered face. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he began, as if the weight of the past pressed on every finger. I've carried this too long. That night, before the big storm hit, I was checking the property. The wind howled through the trees like the cries of lost souls. I saw Sophia driving toward the old stables around midnight. She turned off her headlights, moving slow as a ghost, like she didn't want to be seen. Caleb leaned forward, his gaze sharp as a blade. Did you see Mason? Frank shook his head, his voice low as an undercurrent. Not then. But I saw her trunk cracked open a few inches, like it held something too big to close fully. Curious, I followed from a distance, hiding behind the overgrown brush. She stopped at the stables, vanished into the dark for about 20 minutes. When she returned, the trunk was shut, and she was covered in mud, though it hadn't rained yet. Emily frowned, her heart pounding like war drums. What do you think she hid there? Frank sighed, the sound heavy as a branch breaking in the wind. I don't know, but my gut tells me it was the start of all this tragedy. If you want the truth, start at the stables, before Sophia can erase the evidence. Outside, darkness cloaked Sightglass like a thick black curtain, but in Emily's heart, the flame of resolve burned brighter than ever, like a small oil lamp facing a tempest, ready to illuminate every shadow, even if the cost was her life and those she loved. The next morning, weak sunlight filtered through the gnarled trees surrounding the Sightglass estate. But in Frank's heart, the darkness of the past remained thick as storm clouds. I went to check the stables, he continued, his voice low like an undercurrent crashing against rocks, his cloudy eyes glinting with old pain. But Sophia caught me. She stood there in a pristine white dress like an angel, but her gaze was cold and sharp as a dagger. "If you value your job," she said, "don't meddle in family affairs." 2 weeks later she accused me of stealing a pocket watch of Edward's, something I'd never touched. Edward was drowning in grief over losing Mason then, didn't even bother to ask. I left that day, my suitcase light but my heart heavy as lead. Emily exchanged a glance with Caleb, a spark flaring between them like a small flame in the dark. "Frank," she asked, her voice firm as granite, "would you be willing to testify to the sheriff?" Frank straightened, his presence solid as an ancient oak weathering a gale. "That's why I'm here. After all these years, it's time the truth spoke." He looked at Caleb, his gaze heavy with meaning like a prophecy. "Lily always said that boy would return to Sightglass one day, one way or another. Seems she was right." As Frank departed, his footsteps echoed on the hospital floor like the drumbeat of an approaching battle. Emily turned to Caleb, her eyes blazing with resolve. "We have to search the stables tonight. Whatever Sophia's hiding, it's been there 28 years, long enough to gather dust, but not long enough to erase her guilt." Caleb nodded slightly, squeezing her hand in a silent pledge. "And if we find what I think, then you'll have justice for your parents," Emily finished, her voice low like a vow amid a storm. "And maybe Uncle Edward will finally find some peace amid the wreckage of his pride." That moment lingered between them, their hands clasped like the final pieces of a shattered puzzle, until a nurse appeared, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through the night like a bell. "Mr. Thomas is awake. He wants to see you both." Edward lay in the hospital bed, the stiff white sheet hugging his frail frame like a fabric coffin. But his eyes, oh those eyes, shone brighter than Emily had seen since arriving at Sightglass, like an oil lamp flaring through fog. "The hospital's given me fluids and electrolytes," he said, his voice faint as a breeze but tempered like steel and fire. "They're trying to flush the toxin from my system." Sophia went to get coffee, or rather to avoid my gaze. Emily sat beside him taking his hand, her warm palm offering a fragile thread of hope. The blood tests confirmed aconitine poisoning. Dr. Connor tried to cancel them, but a lab tech pushed through. Edward closed his eyes, his breaths heavy like a branch breaking in the wind. "All these years I trusted her completely. She twisted that trust, turned it into a chain binding me to the dark. Like with Natalie," Emily said softly, her voice low like a whisper from the past. "And your son?" Edward turned to Caleb, his gaze locking onto him like an archaeologist uncovering a buried treasure. "You have his eyes, Natalie's eyes, bright and resolute like a shooting star in the night. I should have seen it sooner." Caleb shifted, uneasy as a cornered animal. "I wanted to tell the truth, but—" "You were wise to be cautious," Edward interrupted, his voice sharp as a freshly honed blade. "If Sophia knew who you were, she wouldn't have let you live this long." "Tell me about Eleanor," Edward requested, his tone softening like the wind at day's end. "Was she happy at least before the end?" Caleb answered, his voice careful as if walking on thin ice. "She was strong. She never stopped loving Mason, never stopped hoping we'd one day return to Sightglass as a real family." Edward's eyes glistened with tears, silent drops falling like rain on parched fields. "I was a fool. My pride stole everything. My son, my wife, and 28 years with my grandson." He squeezed Emily's hand, as if clinging to the last vestige of warmth. "How's your mother?" "Stable but fading," Emily reported, her voice low like a prayer. "The doctors are identifying the exact toxin variant to develop an antidote." Edward nodded, his gaze hard as granite amid a storm. "Sophia won't stop. She's too close to what she wants." "Which is?" Emily asked, her heart pounding like war drums. "Sightglass," Edward replied, his voice resonating like distant thunder. "She's positioned herself over decades, becoming indispensable. Isolated me from friends, family, gradually took control of the finances. With no direct heir, she believed it would all fall to her. Until Caleb showed up," Emily added, her eyes flashing like lightning. "And Mom and I arrived, throwing her meticulous plan into chaos." Edward tried to sit up, wincing in pain, but his resolve shone like an unquenchable flame. "The sheriff's been in touch. They're digging into Sophia's financial records based on your evidence. Caleb stepped forward, his voice deep as a stream flowing over stone. We believe Sophia hid evidence in the old stables. Frank Parker saw her there the night Mason disappeared. Realization sparked in Edward's eyes, like light-piercing years of darkness. Mason's body. We'll investigate tonight, Emily explained, her voice steady as a vow in the dark. If we find what we suspect, the authorities won't be able to ignore our claims anymore. Edward grasped both their hands, his strength faint but his will fierce as an ancient tree defying a tempest. Be careful. Sophia's a cunning fox. She'll sniff out the threat and tear apart anyone in her way. Outside, the sunlight faded over the Sightglass estate, giving way to a darkness thick as a veil hiding sins. But in the hospital room among those bound by blood and determination, a small flame flickered, of justice, hope, and a promise that the truth, buried for however long, would eventually rise like a seed breaking through stone. Emily looked at Edward and Caleb, her heart heavy yet alight, knowing tonight would be a turning point. Not just for her family, but for Sightglass's legacy, where the ghosts of the past awaited release. Edward gripped Caleb's hand tightly, then squeezed Emily's, his strength frail but his will as fierce as an ancient tree weathering a storm. Be careful, he warned, his voice deep like an undercurrent. Sophia's more dangerous than ever when cornered, like an old fox ready to bite and claw her way out. The door swung open and Sophia entered, the coffee tray in her hands trembling slightly, mirroring the turmoil within her. Her practiced smile faltered for a moment at the sight of the reunited family before her, but quick as a flash, she regained her composure, her lips curving like a gilded blade. How nice, isn't it? Such a cozy scene, she remarked, setting the tray down with the precision of a seasoned performer. Edward, you should rest, not entertain family. Edward looked up, his eyes blazing like an oil lamp in the dark, his voice stronger than it had been in years of captivity under shadows. Sophia, you've gone to great lengths to keep me from them. It's not so easy anymore. Sophia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flashed with a chill like winter frost. I've always put your best interests first, Edward. You know that. She turned to Emily and Caleb, her voice sweet as honey but edged with thorns. Visiting hours are nearly over. Edward really needs rest. Emily stood, her gaze meeting Sophia's head-on like a hunter facing prey. The doctor said familiar faces will help orient him. I'm staying tonight. Sophia froze, her mask of calm cracking for an instant, revealing the simmering anger beneath. That's unnecessary. I've cared for Edward for years. I know his needs better than anyone. Nevertheless, Edward interjected, his voice hard as steel forged in fire, I want Emily to stay. Sophia's eyes narrowed, the shift so subtle it was almost imperceptible, but Emily sensed it, like an animal sniffing danger. As you wish, she replied, then turned to Caleb, her tone cold as a winter wind. You should return to Sightglass. With everyone here, the estate's unattended. Caleb glanced at Emily, his eyes carrying a silent promise, then nodded. Of course. I'll check on Mrs. Thomas too. He left, his steps light but resolute, leaving behind a tension thick as storm clouds. Sophia busied herself adjusting Edward's pillows, checking his foreline with movements as practiced as a deadly dance. Dr. Connor's concerned, she said, her voice smooth as silk, about those unnecessary tests Emily requested. They strain your system. Edward looked up, his gaze sharp as a freshly honed blade. I know about the aconitine, Sophia. Her hand paused just for a fleeting moment, before resuming as if nothing had happened. I don't know what you mean. Natalie's journal, Edward pressed on, his voice calm but unyielding as waves against stone. Eleanor's letters, the pendant. It's all clear now. What did you do to my son? Sophia stopped, her mask of concern falling away to reveal a cold, calculating face like an ice statue. You're confused, Edward. The medication's affecting your thinking. Maybe I should ask Dr. Connor to adjust. The poison. Emily cut in, her voice piercing the night like a needle. Sophia's laugh rang out, crisp but hollow like a cracked bell. Ridiculous. I've devoted my life to this family. Why would I harm any of you? For Sightglass, Edward answered, his voice simple but heavy as lead. You've always wanted what isn't yours. A dangerous spark flared in Sophia's eyes, like a flame igniting in the dark. Everything I did was for us, Edward. Natalie was weak. She couldn't bear the estate's weight. And Mason? He was ready to throw away his inheritance for that Ruby girl. The confession hung in the air, cold as a wind through a graveyard. Sophia straightened, her shoulders rigid as a fortress wall. I protected what was ours, what should have been ours, she said, her voice dropping to a hiss through clenched teeth. I loved you all those years while you were blind to everything but Natalie. I kept Sightglass standing after she died. Cared for you when everyone else abandoned you. You poisoned me, Edward said, his voice breaking like glass on a stone floor. Like you did Natalie. Sophia smiled, a chilling calm settling over her like a frozen lake. I saved you from yourself. This conversation's over. You're clearly unwell. I'll tell Dr. Connor to adjust your medication. She turned to leave, but Emily lunged forward, blocking her path like a warrior at a gate. You're not going anywhere except to jail. Sophia smirked, her smile faint but sharp as a dagger. With what evidence? The ramblings of a sick old man? The desperate accusations of a granddaughter who abandoned her family for 17 years? Or the word of a scheming gardener? She stepped closer to Emily, her breath a cold gust from an abyss. Choose your next move carefully. Accidents at Sightglass happen alarmingly often. With that, she brushed past Emily, exiting the room like a phantom dissolving into the night. At Sightglass, Caleb moved through the dark corridors like a figure forged from shadow. He knew the old house's rhythm, which floorboards creaked, which doors hushed like whispers. Reaching Isabella's room, he found her sleeping fitfully, her breath shallow and labored like an autumn wind through dry branches. He placed a hand on her forehead, whispering like a prayer. Hang on, Mrs. Thomas, just a little longer. As he turned to leave, he slipped a small note onto her bedside table, but his eyes caught a new pill bottle, Sophia's handwriting faintly visible under the dim light. It hadn't been there this morning. He carefully tucked it into his pocket, his heart heavy as lead, then continued to Lily's old room in the servants' wing. The tiny room lay still like a tomb, preserved not out of sentiment but cold convenience. Caleb went straight to the loose floorboard under the desk, retrieving Lily's worn leather journal, a record of her suspicions spanning decades. He flipped through familiar pages, each line a knife carving into memory. Lily wrote of Sophia's odd behavior with Natalie's medication, her unnatural interest in the estate's finances, her secret meetings with Dr. Connor. The final entry, penned 3 days before her death, chilled his blood. Sophia caught me checking the stables today. I think she knows I suspect her. The pills she gave me for my blood pressure taste bitter. I've stopped taking them, but I fear it's too late. If I go, the truth lies where Mason rests. God forgive our silence. Caleb closed the journal, a cold resolve enveloping him like armor. Tonight, after 28 years, Mason Thomas will be found. A sudden noise from downstairs startled him, a sharp crack like a breaking branch. He crept to the window, spotting Sophia's car parked along the drive, her figure emerging, hurried as if fleeing a storm. Caleb slipped out of the room, through the kitchen, and out the back door, melting into the garden's shadows. Lights flared in Sophia's room, then the study, and minutes later she appeared, flashlight and shovel in hand, striding swiftly toward the old stables. His heart pounded like war drums as he texted Emily. Sophia's heading to the stables with a shovel. Tonight's everything. The night wind howled, carrying whispers of the past, and Caleb knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. Not just for him but for Sightglass, where dark secrets were about to be torn open by the light. At Sightglass Estate, darkness cloaked the land like a thick black curtain, broken only by the flickering beam of Sophia's flashlight as she hurried toward the old stable, the shovel in her hand resembling the scythe of death. Caleb's message echoed in Emily's mind like a death knell. She's digging. Get here now. She typed back, her fingers trembling on the screen. Don't confront her alone. Wait for me. But as Sophia disappeared into the night, Caleb knew time was no longer an ally. 28 years, a lifetime. Evidence that Lily had buried was about to be erased forever. Taking a deep breath, he rushed after her, Sophia's flashlight dancing ahead like a will-o'-the-wisp leading the way into hell. Rain began to fall, heavy drops like heaven's own tears, blending with the pounding rhythm of his heart. On the winding road back to Sightglass, Emily pressed the gas pedal, the car racing forward like a galloping horse across the desolate fields. Rain lashed against the windshield, its furious rhythm like the symphony of fate, mirroring the storm in her chest. She had left Edward at the hospital with a deputy sheriff, her warning sharp as a vow. No one, especially Sophia or Dr. Connor, is allowed to give him anything. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Caleb flared up like fire in the night. "She's digging behind the north wall. Hurry." "I'm trying," she muttered, gripping the steering wheel as if to crush her fear, her eyes straining against the darkness as she took a sharp turn. The headlights suddenly illuminated a figure by the roadside. Frank Parker trudging through the downpour, his old coat soaked and clinging to his thin frame, but his eyes burned with determination, an undying lantern against the wind. Emily slammed the brakes, rolled down the window, and the rain rushed in like a whispered warning. "Frank, what are you doing out here?" He squinted through the downpour, his voice low and steady, like waves crashing in the depths. "Heading to Sightglass. The sheriff called, wants to talk in the morning. Figured I'd come early and prepare myself." "Sophia is at the stable right now," Emily said, her heart pounding like a war drum. Frank climbed into the passenger seat, raindrops dripping from his hat like belated tears. "She's moving the body? After all these years?" "She knows we're watching," Emily explained, pressing the gas again, tires screeching against the wet road. "Every careful plan she's made is falling apart." Frank stared ahead, his eyes dark as the stormy sky. "I should have spoken up 28 years ago. Maybe Natalie would still be alive and Eleanor." He shook his head, his voice brittle as dry branches snapping in the wind. "You couldn't have known how ruthless Sophia is," Emily reassured him, her voice forged in steel. "But I do. I saw the way she looked at Edward, even when Natalie was alive. Like she owned him, like she owned everything the Thomases had." Frank nodded, his calloused hands tightening into fists. "Lily saw it too. We used to talk about it, but who would believe a housemaid over a trained nurse?" As Sightglass loomed ahead, Emily switched off the headlights, steering onto the service road behind the estate, avoiding the main entrance. The old stable barely stood against the rain, its decaying structure resembling a forgotten grave, weathered planks fading under the pale moonlight. "Stay in the car," she ordered, reaching for the flashlight in the glove compartment. Frank let out a dry chuckle, his voice rough as wine through stone cracks. "Not a chance. I've waited 28 years for this." They moved forward, their footsteps ghostly light on the soaked grass, the only sounds the relentless rain drumming against the rotting stable roof and the steady scrape of a shovel from inside, like the heartbeat of a secret about to surface. Emily signaled for Frank to circle around back while she crept toward the slightly ajar front door. Through the gap, the beam of a battery lantern illuminated Sophia, her face slick with sweat and rain, her hands frantically digging into the dirt floor. A deepening hole revealed the remnants of decayed fabric, and beneath the dark earth, the unmistakable outline of human remains. Emily's stomach tightened like a noose, but she steadied her grip, silently raising her phone to record, the dim glow of the screen reflecting the fierce determination in her eyes. She scanned the area for Caleb. He was nowhere in sight. Suddenly, Sophia stopped digging, her back snapping straight like a frozen statue in the storm. "I know you're there," she called out, her voice sharp as a blade slicing through the night, though she didn't turn. "You've always been too curious for your own good." Emily tensed, uncertain who Sophia was addressing. 28 years I've kept this secret," Sophia continued, facing the grave like she was speaking to the past itself. "And now you think you can expose it all, claim something that was never yours?" A shadow moved in the left corner, Caleb hidden behind a rotting beam, his eyes gleaming like a small fire in the dark. Sophia had been speaking to him, not Emily. "It was never yours to take, Sophia." Caleb stepped forward, his voice low as distant thunder, his fists clenched, ready to face the inevitable. "Sightglass, Edward's love. None of it belonged to you." Sophia turned, her eyes like knives glinting under the lantern's glow, her smile a phantom flame. "And what do you know about what belongs to whom, Davis? You're just a ghost from the past, a wanderer demanding an inheritance you never earned." Caleb moved closer, the rain soaking through his shirt, rivulets running down his sharp features like silent, overdue tears. I know Mason was my father, and you stole him from my mother, from all of us. Frank emerged behind Sophia, his presence quiet but unwavering, his eyes locked onto her with the resolve of a man who had waited too long for justice. Emily raised a hand in silent command, her heart drumming a battle rhythm, ready to strike. Sophia let out a sharp laugh, brittle and hollow, like a shattered bell tolling in a graveyard. You think a pile of bones will change everything? Edward will never accept you. And Emily? She's just the long-lost granddaughter returning to scavenge for whatever she can get from this family's legacy. She tossed the shovel aside, dirt flying up like a final challenge. But if you want the truth so badly, then keep digging. Just don't be surprised when it buries you all. The rain poured harder, a curtain of water washing away Sightglass's illusions, leaving only the stark, cold truth beneath. Emily stepped forward, her voice tempered in fire. We don't need to dig further, Sophia. I've recorded everything, and the sheriff is on his way. Sophia turned sharply, lightning flashing in her eyes, but her smile remained razor-thin, a blade concealed in silk. You think a video will bring me down? I am Sightglass. I've kept it standing while all of you abandoned it. But in her voice, Emily heard a tremor, the first crack in a fortress that had held for 28 years. Tonight, at long last, the truth wasn't just being revealed. It was reclaiming what had been lost, even if it meant consuming the very soul of the estate. Sophia let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp as shattering glass in the dead of night. Her eyes flashed with fury and arrogance. I earned it, she hissed, gripping the shovel handle tightly as if holding on to her own fate. Year after year I served loyally, protecting the Sightglass estate. What did Mason do to deserve the inheritance? Or you? She gestured contemptuously toward the pit, where tattered fabric clung to skeletal remains like a silent accusation. He was weak, just like his mother, ready to throw away generations of the Thomas family legacy for a fleeting summer romance. Caleb stepped forward, his voice taut as a fraying wire, trembling with emotions suppressed for too long. He was about to become a father. He was taking responsibility. Sophia spat, her voice sharp as a freshly honed blade. He abandoned his duty to the estate, to the family name. She raised the shovel slightly, the lantern light reflecting off the metal like an infernal glow. That night, I tried to reason with him, told him to end things with Ruby and return to where he belonged. He laughed in my face, called me pathetic. A loyal dog mourning her master all these years. Emily pushed the door open wider and stepped into the stable, her footsteps ghostly silent against the damp earth. Sophia, too consumed by her confrontation with Caleb, failed to notice her presence. So you killed him, Caleb declared, his voice as blunt as the final stroke of an executioner's blade. Sophia's grip on the shovel tightened, her eyes distant, lost in memory. It was an accident, she murmured, her tone as wistful as the wind passing through a graveyard. One moment we were arguing, the next the shovel was in my hands, and he fell, light as a drifting leaf. She paused, her expression hardening with a chilling justification. At first I was afraid, but then I realized it was for the best. Edward would need me more than ever. The estate would finally be managed properly. And Eleanor? Emily cut in, her voice ringing like a bell in the night, making Sophia whirl around, shovel raised defensively. Was she an accident too? Sophia's expression froze, turning to ice amidst a storm. She was a threat, just like Natalie before her. I thought all challenges to my place had disappeared. Until I learned Eleanor bore Mason's child. I couldn't let another Thomas rise, claiming what I had built. So you tracked her down and poisoned her, Emily said, stepping closer, her gaze sharp as the forensic scalpel that had once sliced through darkness. Sophia's eyes flicked between Emily and Caleb, her smile thin as a concealed dagger. You're too late, little stray. Once I get rid of this body, there will be no evidence. Just baseless accusations from a disgruntled gardener and a forsaken family member against the woman who faithfully cared for this estate for 28 years. It's over. Emily smiled coldly, her voice as steady as a lake before a storm. No, Sophia. The sheriff has your financial records. The hospital confirmed aconitine poisoning. And Frank Parker is testifying about the night Mason disappeared. As if summoned from the past, Frank appeared at the back in trance, his silhouette as solid as an ancient oak weathering a storm. "Hello, Sophia. It's been a long time," he said, his voice deep as the tide rolling in. Sophia hissed, her composure shattering like glass under a hammer. "I should have dealt with you long ago, like I did with Lily." "Lily left evidence," Caleb added, holding up an old journal, its yellowed pages whispering accusations from beyond the grave. "She documented everything. Her suspicions about Natalie's illness, Eleanor's death, and how you poisoned her." Sophia's eyes narrowed, calculating like a fox cornered. Before she could react, her hand darted into her pocket, producing a small pistol. The metal gleamed under the lantern's glow, a silent pronouncement of death. "A shame but necessary," Sophia said, her voice cold as winter frost. "Another tragic accident at Sightglass. 3 intruders shot while trespassing. Poor Edward loses his last remaining family in one night." Emily stared down the barrel, her heart pounding like a war drum, but her voice remained steady as granite. "Edward knows everything. Killing us won't change that." "He's a sick, senile old man," Sophia retorted, her finger tightening on the trigger. "His testimony won't stand against me, especially when his beloved niece and her newfound friend are found plotting to steal his estate." Frank scoffed, his voice rough as wine through cracked stone. "That's your plan? Kill all 3 of us and call it self-defense? You've done it before." Sophia smirked, her eyes alight with a wicked fire. "It worked before, why not try again? Goodbye, Caleb. You're just as much trouble as your father." Time slowed, thick as frozen river water. The gun aimed at Caleb, its cold metal reflecting the lantern's glow. Emily lunged instinctively, her scream a final cry against the storm. The gunshot exploded through the stable, deafening as thunder, ricocheting off the rotting wooden beams. Pain erupted in her shoulder, the bullet burying itself in flesh meant for Caleb. She staggered back, heat seeping through her shirt, her vision blurring like morning mist. "Caleb!" she gasped, her voice breaking with pain, but he was at her side in an instant, pressing his coat against the wound as if trying to hold life itself in place. "Emily, stay with me," he shouted, his deep eyes blazing with panic. "You're okay, you have to be okay." She forced a smile, though her breaths came shallow like the last autumn wind. "Get the gun." Across the stable, Frank tackled Sophia from behind, the 2 figures wrestling on the dirt floor like souls battling in the underworld. The gun slipped from Sophia's grasp, skidding across the ground like a forgotten omen. "You ruined everything," she shrieked, her nails clawing like a wild animal's. But Frank, with the strength of a man who had waited too long for justice, pinned her arms down, his face flushed with exertion. Outside, the rain poured heavier, a cleansing curtain washing away the sins of Sightglass, leaving behind only raw, blood-stained truth. Emily collapsed to her knees, clutching her shoulder, warm blood seeping between her fingers like crimson tears. Caleb knelt beside her, his gaze filled with anguish and resolve. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice breaking like a snapped string. Frank bound Sophia's wrists with the very rope that had once hung nearby, his voice a low, final verdict. "It's over, Sophia. You can't bury the truth any longer." In the distance, police lights cut through the storm, sirens wailing like the long-awaited cry of justice. Emily looked up, her vision blurred but her spirit unbroken. "We did it," she murmured before darkness pulled her into a deep sleep, not of death, but of a victory wrestled from the hands of fate itself. Sophia's composure shattered like glass under a sledgehammer, her face contorted in a frenzy of rage. "Sightglass is mine," she screamed, her voice hissing through clenched teeth like wind howling through a graveyard. "Edward is mine." Caleb carefully propped Emily against a rotting column, his hands trembling as if afraid of losing her again, then lunged toward the gun lying on the dirt floor. Sophia, realizing his intent, thrashed violently against Frank, her strength like a whirlwind from hell. She tore one hand free, sharp nails raking across Frank's face, leaving streaks of crimson like fresh wounds on his aged skin. The butler roared in pain, clutching his eye as Sophia wrenched herself loose, scrambling toward the gun like a predator closing in on its prey. But Caleb was faster. His long legs carried him forward, his fingers closing around the weapon as he stepped back, holding it high in a silent warning. Sophia froze, then slowly curled her lips into a chilling smile, cold as winter frost. "You won't shoot me," she said, her voice laced with the confidence of someone who had peered into the darkness of another's soul. "You're not a killer." A new voice rang out from the doorway, deep and fractured like a broken bell tolling in the dead of night. "But I am." Sophia turned, her eyes widening as she beheld Edward. Edward Thomas, pale as a ghost yet steady as an ancient oak braving a storm. In his hand was an old revolver, a relic from his study, glinting under the lantern's glow like a memory from a long-buried past, aimed straight at her. "Edward," Sophia exhaled, her voice quivering like the last breath of autumn wind. "You don't understand. Everything I did was for you, for us." "You killed my son," Edward replied, his voice cracking like shattered glass on stone. "Poisoned my wife. Destroyed my family." Sophia's face twisted, her fury morphing into something close to madness. "They were weak. Unworthy. I was the only one who truly cared about Sightglass, who understood its legacy." Edward shook his head, his eyes heavy with sorrow, as bleak as a winter sky. "Sightglass isn't land or legacy, Sophia. It's family. Something you could never understand." As if to punctuate his words, the wail of police sirens cut through the distance, growing louder, like the anthem of justice finally come to collect its due. Sophia's wild eyes darted between the three of them and the gun in Edward's hand. In a final desperate cry, she lunged at him, hands outstretched as if to drag him down into the abyss with her. The old revolver roared, a thunderous crack splitting the night. The force of the shot made Edward stumble, nearly losing his footing. Sophia staggered, staring in stunned disbelief at the red bloom spreading across her abdomen. She swayed back toward the pit, the silent grave of Mason Thomas, and collapsed beside him, the murderer falling beside her victim after 28 years of buried sins. Outside, the rain poured in heavy sheets, like a curtain of water washing away the crimes of Sightglass, leaving only the raw, bloody truth behind. The hospital hallway blurred under the sterile white lights, the hurried footsteps of medical staff mingling with the low murmurs of the sheriff jotting down statements. Occasionally, a crime scene photographer passed by, camera lens capturing the final pieces of a bloodstained story. Emily sat on the examination table, wincing as the doctor bandaged her shoulder, the white gauze wrapping around her like a silent promise of healing. "You're lucky," the doctor remarked, his voice deep as a mountain spring, securing the last piece of gauze. "The bullet went clean through, no major damage. A few weeks of physical therapy, and you'll forget this ever happened." Emily nodded, her gaze unfocused, her mind drifting back to the stables, the gunshot Sophia's twisted face. "How are my mother and uncle?" she asked, her voice as faint as a breeze over an empty field. The doctor softened his tone, his eyes offering a flicker of reassurance. "Your uncle is stable. That shot took a lot out of him, but he's recovering well physically. Your mother, it's more complicated. The poison has been in her system for weeks. We've started treatment, but..." He trailed off, leaving Emily to finish the thought herself. "It might be too late," she whispered, her voice as fragile as dry leaves falling in late autumn. "Take it one day at a time," the doctor advised, the practiced diplomacy of someone guiding others through the dark. "The sheriff is waiting to speak with you when you're ready." After the doctor left, Emily slowly pulled on the clean shirt the nurse had given her, each movement a battle against lingering pain. The blood-stained blouse was now evidence, along with the bullet lodged in her shoulder, remnants of a nightmare that felt almost unreal. The echoes of gunfire still rang in her ears, Sophia's confession as sharp as a blade, and Edward's figure in the stable doorway, a specter of vengeance from the past. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Sheriff Wilson stepped in, a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and sun-worn skin that told of years witnessing humanity's darkness. "Miss Thomas, how are you feeling?" she asked, her voice steady as the tide against a rocky shore. "Like I just got shot," Emily muttered, offering a weak smile, as pale as moonlight behind storm clouds. Wilson nodded, pulling up a chair, her notepad in hand like a book of fate. "I have statements from your uncle and Mr. Parker. I need you to help complete the picture." For the next 20 minutes, Emily recounted everything, her voice steady despite the dull throb in her shoulder, a constant reminder of the night's horrors. From Natalie's journal, the discovery of aconitine, Mason's hidden truths, to the bloody confrontation in the stable, she left nothing out. Wilson took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly listening, her presence a silent sentinel of truth. Sophia Grace is in surgery, Wilson said when Emily finished, closing her notebook with a decisive snap. The doctors aren't optimistic. Your uncle's shot went through her liver. If she survives, she's facing a long list of charges. First-degree murder for Mason Thomas, second-degree or manslaughter for Natalie Thomas and Eleanor Ruby, attempted murder of you, your mother, and your uncle. Fraud, poisoning, and likely more once we dig deeper. What about my uncle? Emily asked, her heart tightening like a rope pulling taut. He shot in self-defense, Wilson replied, her voice firm as granite. She had a weapon and had already fired at you. No jury would convict him. Wilson stood, her gaze softening like rare winter sunlight breaking through the clouds. We recovered a personal item from the stable. The medical examiner will confirm, but the locket found with the remains clearly belonged to Mason Thomas. Emily nodded, the weight of it settling in her chest, heavy as lead, yet carrying a quiet sense of relief. Thank you, she whispered, her voice drifting like the last leaf before winter. Wilson left, leaving Emily with the steady beep of hospital monitors and the dull ache. Not just in her shoulder, but in her heart, where loss and justice wove together like light and shadow in Sightglass. Outside, the rain had stopped, making way for the fragile glow of dawn. A promise of a new day, where the truth, however painful, was finally free. His son, surely he knows, Sheriff Wilson said, her voice deep as the waves crashing against the rocky shore, her keen eyes glinting with stern authority. Caleb Davis, yes, we need his statement as well. She paused as if weighing a heavy secret, then sighed. There's something you should know. Your mother's blood test shows she's been exposed to a much higher concentration of aconitine recently than your uncle. Emily's stomach dropped as if hurled into an abyss, an icy fear crawling up her spine. Sophia is accelerating the poisoning, she whispered, her voice drifting like the last autumn wind across a barren field. When everything starts to collapse, she ties up loose ends. Wilson nodded, her sun-weathered face hard as granite. I've assigned a deputy to guard your mother, in case Sophia has an accomplice. We're still not sure. As Wilson left, her footsteps echoed down the hallway like the rhythmic beating of war drums, signaling a battle yet unfinished. Emily dragged herself toward her mother's room. Isabella lay there, motionless as a statue forgotten by time, wires and machines wrapped around her like the unyielding chains of fate. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the room, faint but relentless, like the final beats of a heart refusing to surrender. Emily sat down, taking her mother's cold hand in hers, Isabella's frail fingers resting in her palm like a dried petal pressed between the pages of an old book. You were right about everything, she murmured, tears streaking down her cheeks, warm as late summer rain. We found Mason. We stopped Sophia. Now you just need to wake up so we can go home together. A soft throat clearing cut through her thoughts. Caleb stood in the doorway looking awkward like a schoolboy facing his class for the first time. In his trembling hands, 2 disposable coffee cups sent warmth curling into the air like silent reassurance. Thought you might need this, he said, offering her one. She took it, feeling the heat seep through the paper into her palm like a small flame in the winter night. Thank you, she replied, her voice hoarse like dry leaves rustling. Have you seen Edward? Caleb nodded, lowering himself into the chair across from her. His gaze fixed on his coffee cup as if staring into the depths of a well of memories. They're discharging him tomorrow. The doctors say just a few days without Sophia's medication have already made a big difference. They sat there in silence, 2 lost travelers in a storm, accompanied only by the rhythmic beeping of machines. At last, Emily broke the stillness, her voice as soft as a whisper through the deep woods. What now? With you and Edward, I mean. Caleb looked up, hesitation flickering in his dark eyes. I don't know. For so long, my only goal was exposing Sophia. I never thought beyond that. You're his grandson, Emily said, her voice firm as stone. His only surviving bloodline. Yes, but I'm a stranger to him, Caleb countered, gripping his coffee cup as if trying to crush his uncertainty. And there's more to the truth than I've told. I couldn't say it before, to either of you. He inhaled deeply, as if preparing to leap off a cliff. Sophia was partly right. Mason and Eleanor did plan to run away together. but not just to escape Edward's disapproval. They were running from Sophia. Emily leaned in, her heartbeat pounding like war drums. You mean the night Mason disappeared? He didn't meet Eleanor at Spencer Creek Bridge? No, Caleb said, his voice low as a deep river flowing over stones. He confronted Sophia in the stables. According to Eleanor's journal, the one Lily kept all these years, Mason discovered Sophia was slowly poisoning Natalie. He had proof, samples of the drug, notes on Natalie's symptoms. He threatened to expose her unless she left Sightglass forever. And she killed him, Emily whispered, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup until the thin paper buckled. Does Edward know this part yet? Caleb shook his head, his expression dark as a storm-laden sky. Not yet. I'm waiting until he's stronger. He deserves the full truth, no matter how painful. He squeezed his cup, cracking the fragile paper, his voice breaking like a brittle branch in the wind. And the locket? I didn't find it in Eleanor's belongings like I said. Lily took it from Mason's body the night he was murdered. Emily's eyes widened in shock. Lily knew where Mason was buried? She witnessed Sophia burying him, Caleb confirmed, his voice heavy with the weight of the dead. She was too afraid to come forward. Sophia had threatened her. Instead, she took the locket as evidence, spending decades piecing together every fragment of proof against Sophia. His expression darkened, shadows casting over his face like storm clouds. When she was finally ready to go to the authorities, she started showing symptoms. Sophia poisoned her. That's why she sent you, Emily said, her voice trembling like a frayed string about to snap. Caleb nodded, a bitter smile curling like a pale moon behind drifting clouds. Her last hope for justice. She gave me the locket, told me to get close to Edward, to expose Sophia without putting myself in danger. He let out a dry chuckle, brittle as fallen leaves underfoot. I failed at the last part, but I succeeded in everything else. Mason will have a proper burial, Emily said, her eyes burning with resolve. Sophia will face justice one way or another. And Edward will have his grandson. Before Caleb could respond, a nurse appeared at the door, her voice gentle yet firm, like a bell cutting through the night. Miss Thomas, we need to draw some blood to adjust your mother's medication. And your uncle is asking for both of you. They found Edward in his room, sitting up in bed, looking far stronger than he had in the days of darkness that had imprisoned him. The fog that once clouded his eyes had lifted, replaced by sharp clarity mixed with a sorrow as deep as an ancient well. The sheriff said they found Mason, he said, without preamble, his voice steady as waves against the shore. Emily took his hand, the warmth of her palm offering a fragile thread of hope. Yes, they're confirming it, but the locket was with him. Edward nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as if peering through the mist of time. I need to see him, to say a proper goodbye. Uncle Edward, Emily began, glancing at Caleb. There's something you should know about why Mason was in the stables that night. Caleb took a deep breath and carefully recounted what they had uncovered, from Lily's records to Eleanor's journal. Edward's expression shifted from grief to horror, then finally to something close to pride, like a dying ember flaring back to life. He was protecting his mother, he murmured, his voice breaking like the last autumn leaves falling. For all these years I thought he abandoned his family, but he was fighting for us. He grasped Caleb's hand, his grip weak but his will unshaken, like an ancient oak standing firm against the storm. You are my blood, Caleb. However late, I won't lose you again. Beyond the window, the morning sun burned brighter, cutting through the thick fog of Sightglass, carrying with it the promise of healing, not just for wounds of the flesh, but for the deepest scars within the Thomas family's heart. Emily looked at Edward and Caleb, and for the first time in a long while, her soul felt light, like a bird finally finding its way home after the longest storm. Edward whispered, his voice breaking like shattered glass on a stone floor, his eyes distant as if gazing through the thick fog of time. I used to think he ran away, abandoned us. But he fought for his family, just like his son did. Emily gave a sad smile, her voice as light as a breeze drifting over a desolate field, carrying the warmth of a truth just unveiled. Edward turned to Caleb, truly looking at him for the first time. His eyes gleaming like an oil lamp in the darkness, illuminating the familiar features of the past. You have Mason's courage, he said, his voice deep as waves crashing against the shore. And Natalie's eyes, deep and steadfast like a cloudless night sky. His frail, trembling hand grasped Caleb's, the grip tight as if holding onto something precious that had just been rediscovered. I've lost too many years with my family. I don't want to lose any more. A nurse entered, moving with a gentle yet decisive grace, like a guide leading others through the darkness. She carried a small tray of tools that glinted under the hospital lights. Mr. Thomas, she said, her voice soft as a chime in the distance, we need to run another blood test before your discharge tomorrow. Edward nodded, though his mind still lingered somewhere between joy and sorrow, his gaze never leaving Caleb. Do whatever you need. The nurse glanced at the needle, then from Edward to Caleb, a playful smile flickering across her face like a rare beam of sunlight on a winter day. You know, we could run a quick compatibility test right now, just in case either of you ever need to donate blood to the other. It's always good to know with family. Yes, Edward responded, his voice as firm as granite. Do it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the hospital in a gentle violet hue, the nurse returned, a paper trembling in her hand like a bird about to take flight. Just as we suspected, she said, handing the results to Edward, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. You're a perfect match for blood donation. The genetic markers confirm a direct relationship. Grandfather and grandson. Edward stared at the paper, tears silently pooling in his clouded eyes, like late autumn dew settling on a withered flower. Blood of my blood, he whispered, his voice trembling like the last leaves falling before winter, his frail fingers running over the page as if touching Mason's very soul. Final proof. Caleb stood by the window, his stance awkward, like a student called to the front of the class. The sunset cast a soft pink glow over his angular features. I should have told you everything from the start, he said, his voice drifting like wine through a dense forest. Edward looked up, his gaze softening like moonlight breaking through storm clouds. You did what you had to do, what Lily taught you. Protect the truth until the right time. He extended his hand, trembling but strong, like an old oak reaching out to embrace the wind. Welcome home, grandson. Caleb stepped forward, grasping his hand, the warmth of the handshake like a small fire kindling in the cold night, reconnecting the thread that time had severed. But the moment shattered as an alarm blared from the end of the hallway, sharp as a blade slicing through the night. Emily froze, her heart pounding like war drums. She recognized the emergency code. And then, like a nightmare rising from the depths, she realized the sound was coming from her mother's room. All three of them bolted, their footsteps echoing against the hospital floor like the rhythm of fate itself. By the time they arrived, chaos had already taken hold. Medical staff crowded around Isabella, who lay motionless as a statue abandoned by time. Their hands pressed against her chest in a desperate rhythm. What happened? Emily cried, struggling to push through the crowd, but a nurse blocked her, her gaze steady yet sorrowful, like a lone lantern flickering in the wind. Her heart stopped, the nurse explained, her voice low like a final verdict, gently but firmly guiding Emily back. The doctors are doing everything they can. Time stretched unbearably, each second sinking heavily onto their chests like an unmoving stone. Edward clutched Caleb's hand, his eyes unfocused as if staring through the dense fog of grief. Emily stood frozen, her fingers digging into the chair's armrest as if trying to crush the fear swelling inside her. They waited in agony, surrounded by the frantic beeping of machines and the hushed urgency of the medical team. Finally, the doctor stepped out, his face grave as a stone carving, his eyes reflecting a deep well of regret. We've stabilized her for now, he said, his voice low like the toll of a fractured bell. But her system is shutting down. The poison caused severe heart damage. I'm sorry, but you should prepare yourselves. She may not make it through the night. Emily staggered, like a dry branch snapping in the wind, silent tears slipping down her face like late raindrops over a barren field. She can't go now, she whispered, her voice barely there, like the last leaf falling before winter. Not when we just found each other again. Edward stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her, his warmth a fragile flicker against the encroaching cold, even as he trembled from his own sorrow. She fought for us, Emily, he said, his voice hoarse as waves crashing against a desolate shore. Like Mason, like Natalie, like all of us. Caleb stood beside them, his deep-set eyes reflecting helplessness, his fists clenched as if trying to hold onto something slipping through his grasp. They sat together, three souls bound by blood and loss, in the dimly lit room where the machines whispered Isabella's final breaths. Outside, the sunset faded, surrendering to an impenetrable darkness. But in their hearts, a small light remained. Not a hope for miracles, but the comfort of knowing that the truth, however painful, had drawn them closer than ever before. Edward ran a gentle hand through Emily's hair, his voice low like a prayer carried by the wind. No matter what happens, we still have each other. Our family doesn't end here. And in that moment, amidst the grief and the shadows, Sightglass was no longer just an estate or a legacy. It was them, the heart still beating, still fighting, even if only to say goodbye. 3 months passed like a gentle dream, and now Sightglass Estate was bathed in the golden brilliance of early autumn, resembling an oil painting crafted by the hands of time. The main house wore a fresh coat of paint, gleaming like a polished gem after years of gathering dust. Its windows reflected the sunlight, shimmering like the bright eyes of someone who had rediscovered hope. The garden, too, had awakened with renewed vitality. Lush green grass and blooming flowers declared a quiet proclamation of rebirth. Most striking was the newly established rosier Ral, a charming circular garden where carefully selected rose bushes stretched proudly around a simple yet solemn granite headstone. Inscribed on it were the words, Mason Thomas, birth date, beloved son, forever remembered father. Edward stood beside the headstone, leaning lightly against the smooth trunk of an oak tree, its sturdy form a silent witness to countless events. At 69, Edward carried an air that far exceeded his years. The trials he had endured alongside Sophia had left their mark, deeper wrinkles, slightly hunched shoulders bearing the weight of time. Yet in his eyes a spark had returned, no longer the flickering glow of an oil lamp, but a steady blazing fire, the symbol of a man who had found purpose after decades of wandering. Mason would have liked this place, he murmured, his voice deep like the sound of waves lapping against the shore, as Emily approached. Her shoes crunched softly on the carpet of fallen leaves. He always had a knack for tending plants, even as a child. Like father, like son, Emily replied, her gaze sweeping over the garden where Caleb knelt, his rough yet gentle hands tending to a young rose bush. Soil clung to his fingers like medals of dedication. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, she added, her smile fleeting like sunlight breaking through clouds. Edward smiled, a warmth akin to a winter hearth spreading across his face. His eyes followed Caleb with quiet pride. Not always, he mused. Sometimes the apple rolls far, wandering across wild fields before finding its way back to the roots. He placed a calloused hand on Emily's shoulder, the warmth of his palm seeping through her coat, a wordless comfort. How's your shoulder? Still bothering you? Emily rotated her arm slightly, feeling only a mild ache, like the whisper of wind through trees. Only when it rains. My physical therapist says I'm recovering faster than expected. I'm a Thomas warrior after all. Good. Edward nodded. Then his voice lowered, rippling like a stone cast into a still lake. And your mother? A shadow flickered across Emily's face, like a passing cloud obscuring the sun. Isabella's survival had been nothing short of a miracle in the eyes of the doctors. That harrowing night when her heart had stopped, she had clung to life like an ancient tree resisting a storm. Now she occupied a ground floor room at Sightglass, her recovery measured in small victories. A firmer grip, a step taken without a walker. She's improving every day, Emily reported, her voice brightening like the first light of dawn. This morning, she walked to the kitchen and back without assistance. Dr. Patel says her test results show significant improvement. Edward nodded, satisfaction flickering in his eyes like a small flame against the winter night. Thomas women are warriors. Natalie would be proud of both of you. They watched as Caleb finished his work, standing to brush the soil from his hands, his posture more that of a gardener than an heir. 8 months ago he had been a guarded stranger, stepping cautiously into Sightglass with light luggage and a heavy heart. Now he was the rightful heir to the Thomas legacy, though he still preferred the scent of damp earth and the rustling of leaves over the cold glare of an office. The Abraham Darby roses are blooming well, he reported, his voice deep like an underground stream. In another month, they'll be strong enough to meet even your standards. Edward gestured toward the house. Come inside, both of you. The sheriff called this morning. There's news. Edward's study had taken on a renewed atmosphere, with subtle yet meaningful changes. A photograph of Natalie now held a place of honor on his desk, her gentle smile illuminating cherished memories. Beside it was a picture of a teenage Mason, his eyes alight with determination. 2 new photographs had also joined them, one from the 1990s capturing a summer visit. Edward, Natalie, Mason, and a young Emily, all smiling radiantly under the sun. The other, more recent, Edward and Caleb in the garden, their hands stained with soil, bearing the marks of newly forged bonds. Sophia Grace passed away this morning, Edward announced without preamble as they sat down, his voice heavy like the toll of a broken bell. She didn't wake up from surgery. Emily exhaled slowly, her breath escaping like a gentle wind leaving her chest. I can't say I'm sorry. Neither can I, Edward admitted, his gaze distant as if peering through the mist of time. But I do regret that gunshot, not because she didn't deserve it, but because taking a life, any life, leaves scars on the soul. Caleb leaned forward, his voice as steady as granite. The sheriff ruled it self-defense. She shot Emily. She threatened all of us. Edward waved a hand dismissively, as if brushing away a cold draft. Legal judgment doesn't erase moral weight. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, its yellowed paper carrying the weight of old memories. Her personal belongings were delivered to me, her former employer. Among them was this. He slid the envelope across the desk. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, its fragile pages containing a darkness that had stretched nearly 3 decades. She wrote everything down, Edward said quietly, his voice as soft as autumn leaves falling. Mason's murder, Natalie's poisoning, the hunt for Eleanor and her death, Lily's unintended killing, her plans for Isabella, and finally me. He pointed to a hand-drawn map tucked between the pages, its ink scrawled with the desperation of a confession from beyond the grave. She marked locations around the estate where she buried evidence, syringes, bottles of poison, even stolen items meant to frame others. Caleb studied the map, his expression darkening like a sky before a storm. All this time the evidence was right here on our land, and she never imagined anyone would dig it up. Arrogance was her Achilles heel, Emily observed, her voice as sharp as the scalpel of a forensic examiner slicing through shadows. Edward closed the journal, locking it away as one would seal off a nightmare. The sheriff considers the case closed. Mason's remains will be returned for a proper burial next week. He looked at Caleb, his eyes burning with an unextinguished fire. I want to lay him to rest in the family plot beside Natalie. That's where he belongs. Caleb nodded, his voice low, carrying the weight of an unspoken vow. I want that too. Beyond the study's windows, the golden autumn light grew even more radiant, filtering through the oak leaves, casting a warm glow over the garden, like a whisper from Mason, Natalie, and Lily. At last, after so much pain, Sightglass had reclaimed its soul. Not in its land, not in its legacy, but in the hearts that still beat, still loved, beneath the boundless autumn sky. A friendly silence, warm like an old woolen blanket, enveloped the room, occasionally broken by a distant sound, gentle, like the whisper of the wind. It was the deep, steady voice of the physiotherapist guiding Isabella, that resilient woman, through her final exercises in the sunlit conservatory. His voice, rhythmic and unwavering like the pulse of a steadfast heart, led her trembling legs on the journey to reclaim their lost strength. Edward, exuding an air of composed authority, suddenly cleared his throat, a dry but dignified sound that cut through the quiet. I have reorganized all my affairs, he declared, his voice firm like a general laying out his final strategy. And as part of that plan, I am officially naming Caleb, my beloved grandson, as my heir. Emily, her smile radiant like sunlight filtering through the leaves, tilted her head slightly and exclaimed, That's wonderful, Uncle Edward. A noble and meaningful decision. But Edward, his eyes gleaming as if holding an entire constellation, was not finished. He turned his sharp gaze toward Caleb, who sat there looking bewildered, like a fawn lost in the depths of the forest. I want you to take over the management of Sightglass Estate, he said, his voice lowering like a river flowing over ancient stones. Not just the flourishing gardens but everything, our finances, business, and family legacy. Caleb, a young man with eyes as clear as an autumn lake, instinctively blurted out, "I'm not ready for this. I don't have the education or experience." His voice wavered like a fledgling bird taking its first flight. But Edward, possessing the calm of someone who had weathered countless storms, interrupted him with a gentle yet resolute smile. "You will learn just as Mason, your father, once did. This estate, from its very first bricks to every crimson rose in its gardens, was always meant to be passed down to my son. And now to his son you." Then his voice softened, like a breeze drifting through the trees. "Unless, of course, you don't want it. I will understand if you choose a different path, a new horizon." Caleb quickly shook his head, his hands clasped tightly together as if holding on to something precious. "No, that's not it. This estate has been a part of me for years. Even when I was far away, it still called me back. It's just, this responsibility feels enormous, like a mountain standing before me." Edward smiled, his eyes shimmering like firelight on a winter's night. "That is why you won't face it alone." He turned to Emily, who sat there, her hair catching the light like silk under the evening sun. "I spoke with your supervisor at the county lab. They've agreed to hold your position for another 6 months, so you can stay here and help Caleb get acquainted with the essentials. That is, if you're willing." Emily was momentarily taken aback, like a bird hearing the distant call of its flock, before warmth spread through her chest, as if the pieces of her life were finally falling into place. "I want to," she answered simply, her voice as clear as a bell ringing in a cathedral. Edward nodded in satisfaction, his smile as serene as a still lake reflecting the moonlight. "Excellent. But there's one more thing we need to discuss." He looked at both of them, his keen eyes flickering with an understanding that ran deep. "I may be old, my hair silver as winter grass, but my eyes are far from blind. I see the way you look at each other when you think no one is watching. Those stolen glances, sweet as springtime honey." Emily felt her cheeks heat up, as if she had touched a burning stove, while Caleb suddenly found the rug beneath his feet oddly fascinating, studying it as if it were a treasure map. "Uncle Edward," Emily hesitated, but he raised a hand to stop her, his voice gentle yet firm. "Let me finish. Technically, you are first cousins, but the laws of this state do not forbid such a union. More importantly, you are both adults who found each other through the strange twists of fate. But you've never truly spoken about it, have you?" Caleb made a vague motion between himself and Emily, as though sketching an unspoken question in the air. Edward raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in his gaze. "Then perhaps it's time you did. Life is too short to waste on hesitation. Natalie and I nearly lost each other because of our family's foolish expectations. I won't let history repeat itself." Before either of them could respond, Isabella appeared in the doorway, small yet unyielding, leaning on her walker like a warrior resting upon her sword. She stood taller than she had in weeks, her eyes glowing like a lighthouse in the midnight sea. "And you're giving romantic advice now, Edward?" she asked, amusement lacing her voice, like the soft laughter of a young girl. "With your rather dramatic love history, who would believe you?" Edward chuckled, a sound as carefree as wind chimes in a summer breeze. "Perhaps not a perfect example, but I was right about one thing. I married Natalie for love, despite my parents' protests. It was the best decision of my life." Isabella slowly made her way to an empty chair, settling in with a contented sigh, as if she had just completed a long journey. "Emily, help me to the back garden," she said, her gaze warm. "I want to see the new roses in bloom." Then she turned to Caleb, her voice as soothing as the morning sun. "And you, young man, Lily, your mother would be proud. She always said you carried the determination of Thomas." Caleb whispered, "Thank you. That means a lot to me," his voice trembling like a flower in the breeze. The conversation gradually shifted to simpler things: the evening meal, the scent of freshly baked pastries filling the air, updates on estate renovations, and a lively debate over what type of roses to plant for the next spring. Soft pink or fiery red, like the blaze of passion? Through it all, Emily felt a profound peace settling in her heart, like a cool stream flowing through parched land. The shadows that had haunted Sightglass Estate for decades had lifted, making way for a new family, bound not just by blood, but by choice and the journey of healing together. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of amber and violet, Emily and Caleb stood side by side in the rose garden, near Mason's memorial. The first star flickered into view, a silent witness to the moment. "Your grandfather is quite the matchmaker," Emily murmured, breaking the comfortable silence like waves lapping against the shore. Caleb smiled, his warmth as steady as a heart's fire. "So did it work?" he asked, his eyes twinkling like newly awakened stars. Instead of answering, Emily took his hand, lacing their fingers together like entwined branches in the wind. "What happens next, Caleb Thomas?" she teased, emphasizing his last name, the one he had yet to decide if he would claim. Caleb pondered, his gaze distant as if seeing beyond time itself. "I'm still not sure. But you're right. Thomas is my inheritance. And it does have a nice ring to it." Emily squeezed his hand, her smile as bright as the moon illuminating the night's path. As twilight settled, a soft breeze carried the fragrance of roses through the garden, weaving through the carefully tended bushes. Among them, a single crimson rose, bold yet solitary, bloomed in the darkness, the first to blossom on the very bush planted where Mason had rested for 28 years. Its vivid red petals stood as an eternal flame, a promise of renewal through the trials of life. From the terrace, Edward watched in silence, Isabella beside him, her eyes filled with quiet joy. Their grandchildren stood together, their silhouettes merging as the space between them faded. "Life always finds a way," Isabella whispered, her voice as soft as falling leaves, yet carrying the depth of an ocean. "Life is made of fleeting yet precious moments, where family and legacy intertwine to heal old wounds." Sightglass Estate is not just a story. It is a reminder that even in darkness we can find the light. Share your thoughts in the comments. What path would you choose if you stood at the crossroads like Caleb and Emily? Don't forget to hit like if this story touched your heart, and share it with those you love, because family is where every journey begins. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another heartfelt story, for each day is a new chance to write the next chapter of your life.